Chapter 10. Genius 1 Second Remember Love Go Away? Speak Net. Providing you with wonderful novels to read. Lian Yu had just come back to her senses. In this circle of rich kids, her position was somewhat ambiguous. The reason for this, aside from her family background, was that she was two-timing Xie Junping and her real boyfriend at the same time. Her position was unclear. Because of this, she suffered a wave of cynicism and ridicule when she was thrown off the car by Xie Junping in the morning. It could be said that she was mad with anger. Plus, she had a hangover and other problems. Luo Nan had become a target to vent his anger on the road, causing this incident. Lian Yu's thoughts underwent a subtle change after she calmed down in the detention room. Her anger towards Xie Junping didn't lessen in the slightest, but she had a new plan for Luo Nan. She had been observing Luo Nan all this time. The vast majority of the people in the cramped and noisy detention room were either depressed or noisy. They were full of negative energy from head to toe. Only Luo Nan, this big boy who looked to be the youngest, sat quietly in the corner from beginning to end. Aside from changing into a strange sitting posture once, there was practically no movement from him. The shadow in the corner gently covered Luo Nan's body, blurring his silhouette and many details. But looking at it as a whole, it was fully coordinated. It was like a mask and cloak at a masquerade ball, dressing up a mysterious and profound character. It seemed to be very tasty. So Lian Yu moved closer to Luo Nan. She observed him at a close distance, with a touch of provocation. Luo Nan's delicate, pretty, and quiet appearance was exactly her cup of tea. If he took revenge on Xie Junping into consideration, then it would be even more interesting. Of course, before this, she first needed to figure out the relationship between Luo Nan and Xie Junping. She needed to figure out why Xie Junping was burning with impatience in the morning, and why this little fellow came up when he turned around. Lian Yu's thoughts couldn't be hidden from others. Someone laughed weirdly to the side. Lian Jieyu, he's a vegetarian. You guys can't get together. Vegetarian is also very refreshing. Lian Yu didn't mind people calling her by her nickname at all. Jieyu was the title of an imperial concubine in ancient times. Her status was illustrious, and it also had the meaning of charm and beauty. It couldn't be considered a bad name. As for using her beauty to charm people, or even the evil intentions of not being the legitimate wife, she naturally disregarded them. Lian Yu herself indeed had a heroic spirit that didn't care about meat or vegetables, and she even had the capital to do so. Her well-defined facial features gave her a bit of a mixed-race look. What was really against the rules was her voluptuous and tall figure. She even purposely wore a burgundy tight-fitting short skirt that accentuated her seductive body parts while also showing off her slender waist and long legs to maximize her charm. Now, in order to keep warm, she borrowed a man's outer robe and put it on. But when she spoke, she habitually gestured with her hands, and the front of the robe opened naturally. Her unbridled snow-white skin and the shadow of her coy figure formed a first-class natural composition. It could simply suck in the eyes of the surrounding men. However, all Luo Nan felt was irritation and pain. Lian Yu's attitude towards Luo Nan had completely changed. She wanted to amuse him a bit. She giggled as she went to pat Luo Nan's shoulder as she spoke. She really didn't use much strength in her slap, but Luo Nan had already returned to the state he was in when he and Xie Junping had just parted ways. His face hurt from the mist. This slap was simply like an axe chopping down on his shoulder. In an instant, his entire arm and half of his shoulder didn't seem to be his anymore. Luo Nan's entire face twitched, but Lian Yu only thought that he was nervous. She placed her hand on Luo Nan's shoulder and didn't let go. She borrowed a bit of strength and seductively bent down. We're all fellow inmates who have gone through trials and tribulations together. Aren't you going to introduce yourself? Any other man would enjoy this kind of benefit, but the current Luo Nan just wanted to smash a fist into her face. It hurts. It really hurts. Luo Nan felt as if a fire was burning in his heart. In reality, he had already clenched his fists tightly. But his remaining reason told him that there wasn't any deep hatred or hatred involved. It was just the habitual hunting of a carnivorous woman, that's all. Luo Nan tried to use this to disperse his energy and return to his normal state. He used as flat a tone as possible to reply, Acumen College. 10th grade. Luo Nan. Ha! It really is my junior. And it's a little fresh meat. Lian Yu was a bit pleasantly surprised. Right now, she found Luo Nan more and more pleasing to the eye. His delicate and tender face paired with a cool expression. Yep, and that serious posture of meditation. She couldn't tell if he was angry or shy, but he really was very cute. She couldn't help but want to tease him a bit more deeply. She reached out her hand to touch Luo Nan's face. Her attitude was too obvious, and this insane benefit release aroused the jealousy of some people. Suddenly a hand reached over and grabbed Luo Nan's cheeks in a single step. The person was also laughing and giggling, but his fingertips exerted force, directly squeezing Luo Nan's face until it deformed. Fresh meat? Fresh. Luo Nan's heart thumped. His brain didn't work. He completely relied on his body's instincts to forcefully wave his hand and slap away this person's dirty hand. The intense emotions contained in this action were undoubtedly an intense stimulation to this group of alcoholics and drug addicts. The person who reached out his hand was already in a bad mood. He took advantage of the situation to kick over. Motherfucker, you're being cocky. This kick fiercely stomped onto Luo Nan's shoulder with enormous strength. Luo Nan's body leaned to the side and even Lian Yu was pulled askew. The notebook on Luo Nan's knee slipped down amidst the chaos and was swept away by Lian Yu, who had lost her balance. She slid 2 to 3 meters away. Lian Yu was wearing 10-centimeter high heels. She nearly sprained her ankle in her fluster. She only didn't fall to the ground because she was supporting Luo Nan. She felt that she was in a sorry state and the anger in her heart suddenly rose. Li Xueching, what the hell are you doing? In the end, an even louder voice roared back. What the hell am I doing? Lian Yu was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She jumped 3 feet into the air amidst her shrill cry. Her fingertips, which were covered in manicured nails, greeted Li Xueching's face. Actually, this kind of fight couldn't happen. Li Xueching's slip of the tongue had already caused Xie Junping to lose face. If he were to make a move against Lian Yu, he would really have to scratch a few lines on his face. He wouldn't be able to mingle in this circle in the future. He dodged backwards and there would naturally be enough people coming up to stop the fight. This group of rich kids had just suffered a setback in their drive in prison. They were just about to raise their energy to the breaking point. Now that they could join in the fun, each and every one of them courageously scrambled to be the first. Let's not talk about whether they were in the right or not. It would be good if they could take advantage of a beauty. Lian Yu had already been hugged by 3 or 4 big men before she could even rush up. Words of persuasion left and words of persuasion right. Her entire body had eaten quite a bit of hands of justice from head to toe. She was so angry that her charming face was ashen. She flashed her high heels. No matter who it was, she gave them a heavy kick. She kicked the group of men until they scattered. In the end, the 2 girls who were acting as flower vases had seen enough of the excitement. They went over to persuade them half truthfully and half falsely. Only then did they manage to pacify them. On the other side, Li Xueching had extricated himself from the crisis of having his face ruined, but his face was still damaged. He had a belly full of anger that he didn't know where to vent. His eyes darted all around before he finally saw the pretty boy who had caused the crisis. He stood up shakily and went to pick up the dropped notebook as if nothing had happened. F***CKU. Li Xueching didn't even think. He charged over and kicked Luo Nan's lower back. Chapter 11. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. There were many people to the side, and the space was narrow. Li Xueching didn't use his full strength. He only kicked Luo Nan to stagger, but Li Xueching himself nearly slipped and fell. Love, go small, say. Netku he had finally regained his balance and was about to rush forward again. Luo Nan suddenly turned around at this time. Strangely enough, when their eyes met, Li Xueching felt an inexplicable panic in his heart and unconsciously stopped walking. Lian Yu had already calmed down. Li Xueching's actions had attracted everyone's attention. Li Xueching's actions were obviously inappropriate, but Luo Nan wasn't a person of this circle. This group of rich kids had no obligation to mediate. Not to mention that there were quite a number of people who were still brooding over the can of destiny in the phantom flying car. Even if there was a 9% chance that Xie Junping was the culprit, as long as there was a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 chance, they would be able to shift their resentment onto Luo Nan. Everyone looked on with cold eyes. Lian Yu, on the other hand, felt the attitude of the group of scoundrels in the circle. It was not good for her to step forward and intervene. With an ashen face, she angrily stood at the side. Of course Li Xueqing knew the attitude of his companions. He really did have the heart to go up again. But he didn't know why, even though Luo Nan's face was ashen like a corpse and he looked like he could be blown over by the wind. Li Xueqing was unable to take a single step when he looked directly into Luo Nan's eyes. 1 or 2 seconds wasn't a problem. But 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds had passed, and he still hadn't moved. This was a F*King battle pose. The surrounding scoundrels had obviously noticed something, and were already laughing in a low voice. Li Xueqing felt even more embarrassed. In the past, when it came to this kind of thing, there would naturally be bodyguards and attendants to take care of it. Who the F*** knew that they would feel so uncomfortable when they were on the spot? She couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. She saw that Luo Nan's notebook was right under her feet, so she simply stomped her foot to vent her anger. She stomped right in the center of the notebook. The thick book instantly caved in, and a faint cracking sound came from between the pages. Across from him, Luo Nan was suddenly stupefied. Li Xueqing immediately understood when he saw Luo Nan's expression. His foot had truly stepped into the pit of Luo Nan's stomach. Li Xueqing immediately felt great pleasure. Even the feeling of cowardice that was wrong dissipated quite a bit. He added more force to his feet, and his heel made a good circle on the notebook. At the same time, he drew out his voice, rising and falling rhythmically, like an aria. I'm sorry. Li Xueqing's actions were actually very tasteless and degrading, but since they were on the same side, there were quite a few people around who were laughing and jeering. As for how much was helping and how much was mocking, it was up to the person to decide. Li Xueqing's confidence grew with momentum. He raised his hand and pointed at Luo Nan. Kid! His voice had just left his mouth when his throat suddenly choked up. This was because he saw Luo Nan walking towards him. The entire cabin was no more than 20 square meters. After more than 10 people were stuffed in, it was already very crowded. The distance between 2 people was really just a matter of 2 steps. Li Xueqing's heart twitched inexplicably. At the same time, he met Luo Nan's eyes once more at a close distance. Luo Nan's appearance was very delicate and pretty, but his eyes weren't beautiful. At least, this was how Li Xueqing saw it. Luo Nan's pupils were mottled, as if they were flowing with lustrous and dazzling colors. But in the end, they were controlled by a gloomy and cold tone. Li Xueqing inexplicably thought back to the strange collection he saw in the private garden of a certain best friend. A mutant that was as bloodthirsty as its life. This savage and ruthless beast was over 5 meters long. It was majestic like a mountain, and it was trapped behind layers upon layers of electrical webs. Its body was covered in cuts and bruises, but Li Xueqing couldn't help but shudder when the beast's eyes stared straight at him. Luo Nan's physique was naturally unable to compare with the enormous mutant. But the problem was that there was a glass wall that was harder than steel between Li Xueqing and the vicious beast. There was also a high-voltage electrical net and other lethal mechanisms on standby. And now there was nothing. Nothing at all. Li Xueqing's heartbeat sped up and his pupils dilated. He opened his mouth to shout, but even he himself didn't know what to shout. The problem was that he clearly opened his mouth, but not a single sound came out. Not only that, but his tongue, throat, chest, and all the muscles in his body instantly stiffened. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. His consciousness was clear, but he couldn't get out no matter what. He could only watch helplessly as Luo Nan walked forward. Luo Nan extended his arm, and Luo Nan's 5 fingers lightly clasped onto his throat. It was really just a light touch, and he could not feel any strength. But at this moment, the air in his lungs was quickly sucked out, and his nostrils, mouth, and even pores all over his body were forcibly sealed, as if he was wrapped in a thick and airtight plastic film. His internal qi could not flow out, and neither could his external qi enter. He could not even sweat. His heartbeat increased rapidly, but the amount of oxygen in the blood he pumped out continued to drop. The terrifying feeling of suffocation was like an overflowing tide, slowly but surely filling his brain. Li Xueqing desperately wanted to open his mouth, wanted to breathe, wanted to beg for mercy. He used all the strength in his body, but only his eyeballs bulged, almost popping out of their sockets. The color of blood seeped through her vision bit by bit. Her tear ducts were stimulated. She forced herself to cry, but she couldn't wash away the filthy color. The only thoughts in his mind had collapsed, and only the purest desire to survive remained. He was still struggling with great difficulty. Save me! Save me! Someone save me. Li Xueqing himself did not know, but he was actually able to make some sounds. It was the kind of sound where the muscles in his throat were stiff. It was a sharp sound that squeezed out of his throat, a sound that could die at any moment. Woo 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 woo. At the same time, his face turned from white to red, from red to purple, from purple to black. His eyeballs had already popped out of their sockets by nearly a centimeter, beginning to reveal large amounts of the whites of his eyes. It was as if his blood and energy would explode in the next moment. Each and every one of the rich kids in the cabin were stupefied on the spot. They were unable to understand the pain Li Xueqing was facing. They only saw Luo Nan walk over, extend his hand, and choke Li Xueqing's neck. Li Xueqing was completely scared silly. He actually did not resist in the slightest. Luo Nan looked weak and delicate, but the strength of his hand was terrifyingly great. The current Li Xueqing looked like he could go into shock from suffocation at any moment. He might even die on the spot. No one knew why Li Xueqing was such a coward. But Luo Nan's ferocious strength was even more frightening. At this very moment, everyone believed that Luo Nan was really going to strangle Li Xueqing to death. There were also some people who were clear-headed. They felt that Luo Nan's body movements had a sort of indescribable awkwardness. It was as if he was exerting strength, yet not exerting strength. It was completely out of step with Li Xueqing's pain, so much so that the entire situation was extremely uncoordinated. But this wasn't the most important thing. What truly made people's scalps go numb was Luo Nan's face. Yes, look at his face. Luo Nan's face was originally pale and gray like a corpse. But right now, there was a drunken red glow that spread and piled up. Excitement, right? Excitement, right? This scene was like an incorporeal whip that lashed at the hearts of the surrounding people. Let's not talk about the feeling of the flesh, but their hearts were twitching. Damn pervert. Homicidal maniac. He hid it so deeply. What are you looking stupidly for? Hold him back. Lian Yu's sharp voice tore through the almost sticky fear. She was the first person to react to the stress. She disregarded everything and charged towards the pile of stiff bodies in front of her. The group of people in front couldn't maintain their balance, especially the one at the very front. How far was he from UCI? A servant in front was about to touch her, and this fellow was a coward. He actually let out a blood-curdling scream. But no matter how unwilling the people in the front row were, the sudden explosion of crowding and chaos still pushed them towards Luo Nan. The weight of 7 or 8 people piled together. Even though Luo Nan didn't use his full strength, he still made Luo Nan stagger. His hand that was stuck to Li Xueqing's throat actually slipped away. This scene gave many people courage. There were people in the very front row who simply screamed, "Ah!" They closed their eyes and opened their arms. It was a completely unreasonable bear hug, rushing to cling to Luo Nan. With the first came the second. Under the drive of the herd mentality, a large portion of the people rushed forward. The cabin was in chaos for a time. Luo Nan was pushed away amidst the chaos, but Li Xueqing fell heavily to the ground. He had already sunk into unconsciousness, unconscious. Traces of extreme fear still remained on his face. Things had gotten out of hand. Beep beep beep. A sharp alarm rang. The armed mechanical soldiers that had been there all along were instantly activated. They turned around and pointed their anti-riot guns at the chaotic crowd. Chapter 12. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. In this arrest operation, although the military police had thrown the person here without any follow-up measures, it did not mean that they had completely given up. In fact, there had always been surveillance cameras in the cabin to monitor everyone's vital signs. It was only when they discovered that Li Xueqing was in a state of shock that they took emergency measures. The armed mechanical soldiers were completely cold and ruthless. They would not care about the cause and effect, right and wrong. They would strictly follow the fixed procedure and open fire with anti-riot guns. The high-voltage pulse covered the entire detention room. Everyone who was standing was the target of the attack. Even Lian Yu and the other girls were not spared. Correspondingly, the electric current penetrated his body. The electric currents formed a closed circuit with the human nervous system, stimulating the muscles and instantly putting them into a state of rigidity. Everyone was completely defenseless and fell to the ground. The chaotic situation was immediately swept away. No, there is one more. Luo Nan was forcefully controlled by the bunch of rich kids. Some grabbed him by the waist, some hugged him by the legs. Perhaps it was because he had a few more layers of meat shields, but he didn't collapse immediately. He staggered a few steps and finally managed to maintain his balance. His body was half bent and his hands were on his knees. His calves seemed to be trembling and swaying, as if he could fall at any time. But even so, Luo Nen still stood there. He raised his face slightly, and the blood-red color on his face faded a bit. His eyes stared fixedly over the bars of the detention room, staring at the muzzles of the armed mechanical soldiers. The armed mechanical soldiers also coldly locked onto their only target. Just as they were about to attack again, soldiers in combat uniforms rushed in from the door. The person in the lead was a captain officer. "Retreat!" The voice-controlled command was issued, and the armed mechanical soldiers' electronic eyes immediately turned black. "Love go small, say Netka." The captain's gaze swept across the room and he said sternly, "Everyone, get on the floor and put your hands behind your head." He didn't say what the consequences would be if he didn't do it, but no one wanted to test the law. Even though the numbness had not completely passed, the group of people were still correcting their postures, each of them more obedient than a lamb. Lian Yu sneakily raised her head and cast her gaze towards Luo Nan. There should be many people like her who strongly felt that this sinister and ruthless pervert was stubborn to the end and wouldn't obey the captain's orders. But reality left them completely flabbergasted. Luo Nan crawled down slowly and with great difficulty, but he was extremely obedient. His hands crossed and held the back of his head. Since Luo Nan had moved a few steps before, he was a bit closer to Lian Yu's position. From Lian Yu's angle, she just happened to see Luo Nan's face. He seems to be trembling. It can't be that he only understands fear now, right? Before he could finish his thought, he heard a faint buzzing sound. It sounded like a bee flapping its wings, carrying a faint rhythm. The source of the voice was none other than Luo Nan. Only now did Lian Yu discover that although Luo Nan was lying on the ground, his posture was a bit different from the others. He rested his chin on the ground and looked straight ahead. His lips moved slightly, and the strange sound came from them. It looked like a wasp with a broken wing, struggling on the ground. Could it be that this fellow had gone mad? Lian Yu shuddered and secretly clenched her teeth. She cursed a certain someone who was hundreds of kilometers away. "Xie Junping, you bastard. Just what kind of people do you know?" Xie Junping certainly wouldn't reply, but the military quickly made a judgment. From the perspective of Lian Yu and the others, the armed mechanical soldiers and military personnel appearing one after the other meant that the matter had certainly gotten out of hand. They didn't know how they would be dealt with. But reality proved that in the eyes of the military, a small conflict caused by a group of temporarily detained youngsters was nothing more than a fart. When all was said and done, the military only assisted the police in managing the case. There was no need to waste energy on this. The final treatment was merely to carry the unconscious Li Shueqing out for treatment. Then they dragged Luo Nan, who didn't fit in with the others, to lock him up by himself. No one objected to this. Even if they did, it would be meaningless. But Luo Nan spoke in a low voice as he was being brought out. "There's still my notebook. It's coming. It's coming." Lian Yu and the others all stared with wide eyes. They wanted to see how this deeply hidden pervert would reveal his vicious and untamed side. However, the development of the situation made a fool of them once again. The captain didn't get angry. Instead, he indicated for his subordinates to go into the cabin and pick up the notebook. He picked it up and flipped through 2 pages. When he saw the cracked flexible screen, he gave it a few more glances. Then he handed the notebook back to Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't say anything more. He obediently followed the escorting soldier and left. He was quiet and restrained from head to toe, just like the impression he gave others in the beginning. While Lian Yu and the others looked at each other in dismay, Luo Nan was brought into a solitary confinement room. It wasn't too far from where he was locked up before. Since it was a solitary confinement room, the space was narrow. It was reasonable. There was only a single metal chair placed in the room, and it was fixed to the ground. It would pretty much fill up the rest of the space if it was turned in a circle. This was the place that claustrophobic people were most afraid of, but Luo Nan didn't care. He sat on the chair, and the notebook was naturally placed on his knees. He first wiped away the footprints and dirt on the cover, then he carefully opened it. The metal ring frame of the notebook was already a bit deformed from Li Shueqing's heavy trampling and crushing. The opening and closing tab wasn't too flexible either. But this kind of damage wasn't much compared to the flexible e-ink screen. It was unknown where Li Shueqing got his strength from, but the flexible e-ink screen, which was extremely flexible and tough, had over a dozen fine cracks. Some of them ran through the entire screen. It looked like the flexible e-ink screen would fall apart with just a bit more strength. However, the flexible e-ink screen could still be used even in this way. The screen lit up with a light swipe. Luonan felt a bit relieved. Next, he didn't care about anything else. He directly opened up his most commonly used drawing software. The familiar loading sign lit up, and he soon cut into the normal interface. The draft of the burning wraith appeared on the highest level. It looked quite normal. Luonan let out a long breath. He pressed his finger long, wanting to enter the next level interface. But the temperature of his breath didn't even have time to change when the flexible e-ink screen suddenly darkened. It automatically shut down, without a trace of light. It was like an ominous black post that had been smeared with ink. Luonan tried many different methods to reboot the screen, but he didn't see any reaction. He began to stare blankly as he faced the pitch-black, shattered screen. The miniature camera in the corner locked onto Luonan's stupefied and stiff face, transmitting it to another cabin on the warship. There, the freshly minted lawyer, Zhang Yingying, rushed over, looking travel-worn. She was currently handing over legal documents to the relevant person in charge of the ship. Right now, she had changed into an old-fashioned ash-black dress suit. Her hair was coiled up in a bun. The only bright color on her body was the gorgeous sapphire blue scarf around her neck. Oh, there was also that pair of slender and long calves. They were directly exposed to the air. Her entire body was flawless, and the texture of her skin appeared even more exquisite under the support of her black velvet high heels. It was as if she was glowing with a jade-colored light. The one who was connected to Zhang Yingying was the transport ship's logistics deputy supervisor. This somewhat stout lieutenant colonel officer had the surname Liu. He had already received a warning beforehand. Even though the mature-dressed female lawyer had a tender face, she looked suspicious no matter how he looked at her. He didn't have any intentions of getting to the bottom of things. Of course, perhaps this had something to do with the reason why his eyes kept glancing downwards. Chapter 13. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Lieutenant Colonel Liu was a bit frivolous, but he had cultivated a habit of caution from working in logistics for a long time. This caused him to have some misgivings about the situation itself. The others are easy to deal with, but this kid called Luonan is a bit suspicious. He's so young, yet he acts so ruthlessly. His reaction after the matter is quite odd. Zhang Yingying replied seriously, "It's a pity that this happened, but I think that this kind of hot-blooded conflict will not affect the judgment of the case itself. Of course, the military is only responsible for temporary custody and will not comment on the matter." Lieutenant Colonel Liu said this for the time being. Soon he revealed a smiling face. According to the orders of the higher-ups, Luonan and his group will have to wait until the investigation of the incident is complete before they can be screened and archived. I estimate that there are at least 8 hours left. We weren't allowed to communicate with the outside world before this. Miss Zhang, you're early. Speaking of which, the officers' activity room on the ship has quite good coffee. Why don't I invite Miss Zhang over to kill some time? Zhang Yingying didn't even blink in the face of such a crude method of picking up girls. She directly refused. That's not necessary. My client looks like he has nothing left to live for. It's better for me to keep an eye on him. Lieutenant Colonel Liu shrugged. It should be the damaged flexible screen. It has a special meaning to him. For example, a birthday present from his father. Zhang Yingying raised her eyebrows. Father's gift? Good idea. Lieutenant Colonel Liu was a bit stupefied. He couldn't match the thought process of the young lawyer in front of him, but in order to achieve his goal, he still revealed a smiling face and flaunted those vague philosophies. Adults need to carefully decide on a reason to allow themselves to be vulnerable. Children, on the other hand, are much more casual. They can be defeated at any time, but they can recover quickly because they are still under the protection of their family. Their father will soon make up for it. When my client was 4 years old, my father abandoned him, patted his butt, and disappeared. Love, go small, say, netku. Was this another rejection? Lieutenant Colonel Liu felt rather embarrassed for a moment. He retreated with his tail between his legs, but he was also unwilling. Just as he was in a dilemma, he saw Zhang Yingying give him a thumbs up. "That's why I have to say, Mr. Lieutenant Colonel, what great intuition." Zhang Yingying hooked her index finger and thumb, and the other 3 fingers cut in the air. Did you know 60 years after the advent of flexible e-ink screen products, there were more than 200 brands and more than 3,000 products in the world? However, the one in my client's hand is not any model on the market. Lieutenant Colonel Lu was confused, but it was good to be able to chat with a beauty. He tried hard to think. It's a private production? That's right. My client's father is a first-rate industrial designer. Before he left his job and went missing, he had outstanding work experience in both the production and creative departments of Quantum Corporation. Making such a gift for my only son is the most appropriate. Lieutenant Colonel Lu made a rough estimate. In other words, it has at least 12 years of history? TSK. But I have to say, it will be very difficult for you to claim a high compensation from the vandals based on this. Zhang Yingying smiled and naturally wouldn't explain any more to Lieutenant Colonel Lu. In fact, when she was in the office, she had already done a more detailed analysis based on the flexible e-ink screen video she had obtained in the morning. Even though Luo Nan's flexible e-ink screen wasn't a product that could be found on the market, the material used to make it was a must. For example, that ultra-thin panel belonged to the Jellyfish series, which was released in the beginning of the year 2090. This proved that the earliest time Luo Nan received this gift was in the year 90. In other words, it was very likely that Luo Nan's father, who had been determined to be missing or even dead, was still maintaining contact with Luo Nan. Perhaps it was just this little bit. The year 90. The incident with Lu Hong was also in this year. There's also the Quantum Corporation's burners and the Deep Blue platform. It really seems to be very crucial. Zhang Yingying gazed at the silent and stiff big boy on the monitor screen. She suddenly really wanted to know what kind of feeling Luo Nan would have when he was only 10 years old on a certain day in the year 90 when he received this gift from his father, who was nowhere to be found. Was he reminiscing right now? The monitor screen didn't transmit Luo Nan's thoughts, but it clearly transmitted his body movements. After sitting silently for a long time, Luo Nan finally made a new movement. He stood up, closed the broken notebook and placed it on the chair. He himself took a step towards the door. Since the space was narrow, Luo Nan's body leaned slightly forward at this distance. His forehead stuck to the thick and cold metal door. He maintained this position for a few seconds. During this time, one could see him take a few deep breaths. Up until now, Luo Nan's movements were very easy to understand. He was doing his best to calm his state of mind. But Luo Nan's next actions were incomprehensible. On the monitor screen, Luo Nan moved a bit. He adjusted the distance, but his gaze was always directed towards the metal door. He was focused and serious, as if there was an incomparably exquisite work of art in front of him. A full minute passed before he closed his eyes again. He extended his hand and let his fingertips slide across the surface of the metal door, touching it from one end to the other. This wasn't the end. His fingertips streaked across the corner of the wall, touching the metal plate wall to continue his previous actions. And so Luo Nan walked round and round within the cramped space. His fingertips carved out continuous incorporeal marks on the metal wall. What's going on? The changes were strange and inexplicable. Lieutenant Colonel Lu was a bit dizzy. Zhang Yingying didn't respond. She just watched with interest. This lawyer was drunk. All right, Lieutenant Colonel Lu felt that this couldn't continue. After all, Luo Nan was still a minor. If by any chance he were to suffer some sort of stimulation and go crazy from holding it in, then his military career would come to an end. He indicated to his subordinates to prepare for intervention measures. The confinement room had tranquilizer spray equipment. It was prepared to prevent the mental confusion and even self-harm of the confinement personnel. But Luo Nan's footsteps stopped at this time. It was as if nothing had happened before. He picked up the notebook on the chair and sat down as before. He flipped to a blank page in the notebook and took out the electronic pen. He pulled out the sensor pen tip and the back half of the pen turned into a fluorescent pen that could be used to write on paper. Luo Nan's pen tip descended under Lieutenant Colonel Lu's astonished gaze. He drew criss-crossed dark lines on the paper. His pen moved extremely quickly, and he was extremely proficient in simple strokes. A rough outline appeared in a few breaths of time. Lieutenant Colonel Lu gestured to the monitor to give a close-up. The outline of the lines on the paper resembled a building. Though it was only a sketch, some of the details such as the sealed fence, thick walls, narrow windows, and so on were put together to give people a strong hint. This was a prison. It was just that there was a kind of unnatural misalignment in the overall configuration. It was as if there was a kind of power that intervened between the intangible and the tangible, distorting this building. Lieutenant Colonel Liu only half understood what he was looking at. He heard a slight sound from his side at this time. He turned his head to look and saw Zhang Yingying's eyes focused on the monitor screen. The tips of her feet subconsciously tapped the floor lightly. Her expression was unprecedentedly focused. Oh, perhaps there wouldn't even be a reaction if he extended his hand to touch the young lawyer's pert, but right now. Chapter 14. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Xiaofan provides you with wonderful novels to read. Luo Nan didn't know that someone was paying close attention to his every move. Even if he knew, he wouldn't have the extra mental energy to pay attention to it. His condition was very bad. Hunger, pain, numbness, and hallucinations. These negative elements that originally existed only increased as time passed, not decreased. Moreover, they gradually converged and turned into a corrosive poisonous fire, driven by some invisible force, drifting around his internal organs, limbs, and bones. The so-called incorporeal power was none other than the spectre that Luo Nan had discovered through his visualization. The spectre of today no longer had the mass of a mosquito. It controlled poisonous flames to flow within the depths of Luo Nan's flesh and blood. It constantly devoured essence and energy, growing and strengthening, and it continued to exert more and more interference on Luo Nan. It formed an effect similar to a blockade. Every time Luo Nan tried to calm his heart and clear his thoughts, enter a meditative state, and study the source of the spectre in detail, intense disturbances would come howling from the plane of his body and mind, blasting him out. If things were to continue like this, Luo Nan would sooner or later be exhausted to death by the spectre if he were to enter the fixed space and suffer the backlash of failure. Wraith had been trying to stir up Luo Nan's emotions. It was just like his conflict with Li Xueqing. Luo Nan had used a fatal psychological suggestion to nearly kill Li Xueqing. His ears clearly reverberated with the faintly discernible laughter of the spectre. He was just a little bit away from breaking the string of reason. Luo Nan also remembered the moment his palm pressed against Li Xueqing's throat. Li Xueqing's fear and despair melted within his flesh and blood, converging into a surging wave of heat that rushed in. However, it was destined to be a turbid flow. Not only could it not be used by him, but it even swept away some of his essence qi. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, but it was not hard to imagine where it went. The spectre used this method to rapidly grow and strengthen. It squeezed Luo Nan's living space step by step. Naturally, Luo Nan was in a bad mood right now. But if one looked closely, this feeling was mostly a bad experience of old memories being stirred up to the point where the dregs floated up. He was very dissatisfied. Just now, because of the laptop. Because of the flexible e-ink screen, he was so angry. This shouldn't have happened. The flexible e-ink screen had been with him for 5 years, and he was used to forgetting everything except its actual functions. But where did that ruthlessness and impulse come from? After that, how did his absent-minded state of mind surge out? Was it because his flesh and blood contained a certain person's genes? That coward. Hee. The irony was that the active interference of the spectre gave Luo Nan a very good explanation, so much so that he actually felt a bit of subtle relief. Attributing everything to ghosts. That made things much simpler. The spectre's blockading interference had indeed caused a lot of trouble. But why did he have to stubbornly smash his head until it bled? Luo Nan entered the fixed space in hopes of drawing support from that state to further understand the spectre. He wanted to make contact with it, capture it, and exterminate it. Ghost's obstruction and interference proved that his train of thought was correct. From Luo Nan's point of view, the one with a one-track mind should be Wraith. In order to understand something, one didn't necessarily have to go through the fixed state. Luo Nan had a more direct method, a pen and a piece of paper. Over the years, he had collected character materials, described the surrounding scenery, and sketched countless times on the spot to capture the characteristics of others. His writing might not have been methodical, but he had long trained his acumen to be first-rate. Now, all he needed to do was to create a special self-portrait. Lines flowed down from the tip of the pen, piling up layer upon layer and intertwining with each other. His mind was neither close nor distant. He was focused and relaxed, fluid and agile. There was actually a tendency to go out of control. In a certain sense, hand drawing was freer than visualization. The visualization diagram seemed to come out of thin air, but it was actually very strict. It had to maintain a certain synchronization with one's body and mind. It couldn't be increased or decreased at will. But a sketch drawn on a piece of white paper was different. It came from reality, yet it could be separated from reality. It could be used to describe certain thoughts and concepts through virtual, fantasy, and symbolic brushwork, completely liberating one's inspiration. Back in the day, his grandfather was able to use hand-drawn diagrams to express the marvels of formatting theory. Today, Luo Nan could use similar methods to describe and explain the changes that occurred to his body. This change could even be deduced on paper. It was a step ahead, forming a pre-made draft for a great work of art. Therefore, Luo Nan drew a prison that didn't exist in reality to symbolize the most prominent idea in his mind. This was the first time Luo Nan had been imprisoned in his entire life. It was a novel experience, and he naturally linked it to the first sentence of the 16 words mantra. My heart is like a prison. Luo Nan believed that the 16 words mantra was certainly some sort of interpretation of formatting theory from his grandfather. The words prison, furnace, mirror, nation, and so on were even direct descriptions of the level of formatting. And according to his deduction of the sequence, the format of prison might be an advancement of container. Therefore, he used the cold and cramped confinement room as a reference. He used the free and smooth edge of his brush to gather the faintly discernible inspiration. He even used the indescribably wonderful energy to construct a marvelous building that belonged solely to him on paper. Of course, he knew that the structure of the prison he drew was mostly fantasy. He might not be able to use it on the formatting, but as long as he had the clue of inspiration, it was enough. As for the distorted picture, it was easier to explain. This was because the picture reflected reality. The power that distorted the building came from within the building. The incorporeal and shadowless specter was the instigator of all this. He couldn't see the specter, but he could indirectly sense its existence through the distorted picture. The more elements appeared under the brush, the closer the self-portrait was to reality. At this very moment, the tip of Luo Nan's brush and his thoughts merged into one. They were indistinguishable from each other. It was as if there was no space between them. The imaginary world of nothingness was like a picture scroll that unfolded before Luo Nan once more. The outline of a tetrahedron, its inscribed sphere, and its circumscribed sphere appeared clearly. It overlapped with the prison on the paper to form a marvelous picture. It didn't matter if he couldn't enter the fixed space. He could reproduce the fixed space here. In fact, the reproduction of the fixed space proved that Luo Nan's state of mind had already eliminated the interference of external forces. The specter's movements were meaningless. The tip of Luo Nan's brush did not stop. His state of mind had already returned to the fixed space. The specter, who had been interfering and destroying all this time, was caught off guard. It finally revealed its strange appearance. Other colors seeped into the originally empty darkness outside the visualized diagram. It was a kind of oppressive dark red. It was like a struggling flame within the ashes that had yet to be extinguished. It seeped and blended with the darkness to form a somewhat fuzzy silhouette together. This thing swam within the darkness, sticking to the visualized diagram in an attempt to penetrate inside. And it had already penetrated quite a bit. If it were someone else, they would need to spend some time to find the boundaries of this monster. But Luo Nan recognized its appearance with a single glance. The burning wraith. It was precisely this wraith that was faintly discernible during the earthquake in the R&D district. It howled and nearly took Luo Nan's life. Afterwards, it concealed itself into nothingness, making it hard to trace. Luo Nan even left its image on the drawing software. If he hadn't encountered his true fate, Luo Nan would already be at school right now. He would be looking up information, striving to find the slightest trace of the wraith. How could he have imagined that this fellow would actually be in such a state, wandering within his consciousness, fusing with his flesh and blood? Luo Nan didn't stop writing, but his lips curved into a light smile. Hey! You're smiling! You're smiling! Lieutenant Colonel Lu cried out involuntarily. Then he felt extreme shame. He felt that he must have been infected by Luo Nan for him to make such a fuss over nothing. Zhang Yingying was also very curious about Luo Nan's current state of mind. Unfortunately, the monitoring screen was destined to be unable to detect Luo Nan's thoughts. On the other hand, a beep rang out from the monitoring room. The door opened and someone walked in with large strides. Zhang Yingying looked back with curiosity. She saw that the person was wearing a well-ironed sky blue uniform. He didn't wear a military rank. He was clearly out of place in the room filled with deep space gray aerospace army uniforms. Lieutenant Colonel Lu turned his head to look at the person. His brows slightly furrowed, but he quickly squeezed out a smile. He walked a step forward and spoke with a chuckle. "Assistant Yen, how's the search going?" Chapter 15. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Assistant Yen didn't immediately respond to Lieutenant Colonel Lu's greeting. His gaze first swept over Zhang Yingying, pausing for a moment, just in time to meet the latter's gaze. Love, Gobe small, say. Netco Assistant Yen was in his early 30s and of medium height. He might not even be as tall as Zhang Yingying in high heels, but his posture was strong and his face was quite handsome. It was just that the corners of his lips were habitually pursed, and his expression was cold and solemn. He did not look like someone who was easy to talk to. What left the deepest impression was his eyes. His pupils were slightly dark red, and a similar color seeped out from the edges of his eyes, especially at the corners of his eyes, where the protruding veins and veins near his temples were intertwined. It was a rather uncomfortable feeling. Lieutenant Colonel Lu saw that the two of them were sizing each other up, but he pretended that he didn't know and didn't help to introduce them. Assistant Yen, what can I do for you? According to the command center suggestion, a batch of detection equipment has been transferred from my company to be used to screen the suspects temporarily detained on the ship. Assistant Yan's face was expressionless as he directly operated his wristband. He indicated to Lieutenant Colonel Lu and quickly passed the authorization verification. Detection equipment? Lieutenant Colonel Lu asked curiously. Is the search over? Not yet, but the precision of the equipment is quite high, and the installation and debugging will take some time. Understood. Lieutenant Colonel Lu felt a bit regretful. Since it was equipment acceptance, as a supervisor, he had to be present. That was the end of his friendly interaction with the young female lawyer. He signaled Assistant Yen to wait for a moment and turned to Zhang Yingying with a smile. Miss Zhang, shall we stop here first? It's still early, so I'll arrange a cabin for you to rest first. I'll arrange for someone to send the information to you later. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Zhang Yingying knew that it was no longer suitable for her to stay in the monitoring center alone, so she took the initiative to shake Lieutenant Colonel Lu's hand and bid her farewell. When she passed by Assistant Yen, Zhang Yingying gave him a friendly smile. She narrowed her eyes and activated the automatic camera function of her contact lenses, saving a photo of the person's face. The corners of Assistant Yan's lips twitched. He didn't know if that was considered a response. His line of sight did not land on Zhang Yingying either. Judging from the angle, he was looking at the surveillance footage in the room. Zhang Yingying glanced back the instant she walked out the door. Lieutenant Colonel Lu could be considered quite cautious. He didn't want to give others a handle. He had long since indicated to his subordinates to switch out Luo Nan's close-up. Luo Nan's figure had already disappeared into a dozen or so similar images on the monitor screen. He couldn't be considered too eye-catching. But Zhang Yingying had a strong feeling. The focus of this Assistant Yan's gaze was aimed at Luo Nan, and it had been a long time since he moved. Walking in the corridor inside the warship, Zhang Yingying entered the image she had just taken into the database and confirmed the search criteria. Judging from the uniform, it's Sky Blue Security, a professional security company under Quantum Corporation. They're able to communicate directly with the military, so their position should be high up. And those eyes. A few seconds later a warning sounded. Information listed as secret. You do not have sufficient authority. Zhang Yingying wasn't particularly surprised. She pursed her lips and switched to another channel. Not long after, he took out a simple personal file. The reason why he said it was simple was that there was still a considerable portion that had been blocked. However, she could already verify a portion of her conjecture from the current information. The electronic photo on top of the file was precisely Assistant Yan's appearance. He was just younger by 7 or 8 years, and he was currently revealing a spirited smile. Yan Yonghua, former lecturer of Acumen College. He left his post of his own accord in '90. His father, former professor of Acumen College, Yen Hong. Okay then. Enemies really do meet on a narrow road. Speaking of which, did he recognize me in the end? Zhang Yingying thought back to the conversation she had with Xie Junping before she boarded the warship. She had no choice but to make an amendment. This giant ship of Quantum Corporation doesn't care about little ants, but the spider and whatnot on it might not. This seemed to be a very troublesome choice. Give it up? Luo Nan's thoughts stirred and the marvelous scene that appeared beneath the tip of his pen flowed within his mind. It's really cool. Luo Nan, who was very cool, was still drawing with his pen. Even though he had already entered the fixed space, locked onto the source of interference, and confirmed the true identity of the specter, he didn't have any intentions of stopping. The feeling of the pen and mind merging into one was truly very marvelous. The burning wraith was an inconceivable existence. Luo Nan didn't know how to categorize it and determine its nature. Even though he had entered the fixed space, he didn't have too many clues as to how to deal with it. But when he held the luster pen in his hand and allowed the lines to flow from the tip of the pen, all the problems were no longer problems. The material and the mental, the real and the illusory, the present and the future. Multiple dimensions interweave together to depict the same goal from multiple angles. His inspiration would never dry up no matter what. The distorted sketch of the prison building that was filled with symbolism revealed more and more clear conceptual clues. Luo Nan's lips unconsciously opened and closed slightly. He silently recited the mnemonic chant that he had long since become familiar with. He only chose the first 4 words. My heart's a prison. He silently recited it without a sound, but the intent that carried through it had never been as condensed as it was now. It broke through the boundary between the real and the illusory to attack the plane of the visualization. It was as if it had transformed into an iron hammer that smashed heavily onto the visualization diagram. It was like the ringing of a bell. It was like the striking of a chime. Countless silver threads were extracted from the diagram amidst the fine vibrations. They split apart to randomly construct countless flickering structures. And they clearly had a close relationship with the prison building in the notebook. Some were clear and proper. Some were distorted and blurry. There was also an enormous difference in their images. There were tightly woven fences inside. There was a sealed iron cage. There were leaping arcs of electricity. There was a malevolent beam gun. In short, each and every one of them was a symbol of violence and coercion. They were the embodiment of the details of the prison drawing. Due to the leaping of consciousness and the haphazard brushwork, the majority of the structures were only superficial. They didn't conform to the principles of construction at all. The time that they existed was extremely short. But every time the intertwining and shattering structure of silver threads swept past, the burning wraith that had already penetrated into the inner layer of the visualization diagram acted as if it was facing a great enemy. It moved endlessly in defense, cutting quite a sorry figure. The burning wraith also wanted to carry out interference and destruction. But the problem was that the process that unfolded in multiple dimensions at the same time had already completely exceeded the scope of its control. Luo Nan didn't understand why the burning wraith that was over 100 meters tall had gone wrong when it howled at the sky. It was actually so unbearable. But he wouldn't stop. The chanting never stopped. The visualization never stopped. The tip of the brush never stopped. Gradually, Luo Nan gave up on injecting the inspiration of the details into the sketch. Instead, he began to do subtraction. He revolved around the increasingly clear conceptual clues and strengthened them. Within the visualization diagram, those leaping and combining silver threads seemed to respond to the intense and pure intent of his mind. Hundreds and thousands of flashy but impractical constructions collapsed with a rumble, revealing the simple and pure composition of the tetrahedron once again. At the center of the diagram, at the center of the inscribed sphere, there was a crashing sound coming from the center of the sphere. It was as if the heart was trembling. The burning wraith actually lost the courage to linger any longer when faced with this change. Within the darkness, the light of the flames curled up and separated from the visualization diagram. It transformed into a streak of red light that pierced through the sky and left. This was the visualization plane. Where could it go? Before this thought could finish, the world of nothingness shook once more. The red light seemed to penetrate through an incorporeal membrane. After a slight pause, it increased its speed and pierced through the sky. Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly went into a daze the instant the membrane was penetrated. An ice-cold metal wall appeared in his field of vision. A notebook was placed on his lap, and He was drawing with his pen. Chapter 16. Genius in 1 second. Remember Love Go? Talk Net. Providing you with wonderful novels to read. Out-of-body state? Right now Luo Nan was like watching a supernatural movie. But before he had the time to experience the pros and cons, the burning wraith's red glow had already penetrated through the wall in the blink of an eye, disappearing without a trace. Oh, saying disappearing wasn't accurate. This was because there was still an indescribable, yet clearly distinguishable sensation that marked the burning wraith's position in the bottom of his heart. Luo Nan knew the reason. This was because the drawing under his pen was a self-portrait in name. In reality, it depicted a considerable range of mental and physical states. Naturally, this included the burning wraith. Oh, the unnatural distortion on the sketch of the prison building, was it? Right now Luo Nan's visualization and drawing had already merged into one. It was difficult for each other. Since he had left an imprint on the sketch, how was it possible for him to not leave a trace in his mind? No matter where the burning wraith fled to, it still appeared clearly on Luo Nan's drawing and within his mind at this moment. And because of the burning wraith's abrupt escape, the dynamic change of the interference power stimulated Luo Nan's inspiration once again. His main body actually hadn't stopped writing under this inexplicable out-of-body state. Even though the sketch in his notebook couldn't contain any more details, his inspiration had already gushed out. It was unstoppable. The tip of his pen was practically piercing through the paper. It drew intertwined lines on the only empty space on the outside of the sketch. The constantly strengthening conceptual clues finally buzzed into shape under the casting of inspiration. It was just like... Crash! On the visualization plane, a thick, heavy crow chain appeared like a predatory python amidst the trembling sound. It appeared from the center of the visualization diagram, exploding out with its long body. The incorporeal membrane that had just been pierced was torn apart once more. The crow chain then broke through the void and entered reality. It followed the direction the burning wraith fled in, breaking through the air. Luo Nan didn't know how long the chain was. The front half had already entered the void, but the center of the sphere still hadn't been pulled to its limit. Perhaps length had no meaning on this plane? In a split second, Luo Nan heard a sharp hiss. The crow chain, including his mind, made contact with the scorching hot and irritable burning wraith in this instant. The chains trembled and moved even faster, actually forcefully piercing through the other party. Immediately after, countless silver threads burst forth, shuttling back and forth, interlocking with each other, firmly locking the burning wraith in place. Caught it! But Luo Nan was only delayed by 1,000th of a second. Before he could taste the taste of victory, an enormous pulling force passed through the long chain and fiercely acted upon his body. The burning wraith also didn't know where it got its strength from, but it was like a wild boar that had gone berserk. Disregarding everything, it carried the chains and madly leapt forward. Luo Nan was unable to control the explosive charge of the specter. Even his body was affected by some sort of strange and mysterious power. He just felt his entire body lighten, and the intersecting images of reality and visualization rapidly changed. The environment of the confinement room was replaced by the various cabins, corridors, and mechanical structures of the ship. This time, it really was an out-of-body experience. Moreover, it was forcibly dragged out of his body by the berserk burning wraith, through the wall. What was this? The physical laws of the soul? At first, Luo Nan was still thinking whether or not there were people who could see this unscientific scene. But soon he was certain that the soldiers, officers, and AI machines that came and went on the warship were completely unaware of the chase that was happening above their heads. The tightly guarded transport ship had been completely transformed into an undefended racecourse. At least it was like this for now. It must be said that this was quite a novel experience. Luo Nan also tried to observe his current state of existence. He worked hard for a long time before coming to a preliminary conclusion. In his soul state, his form was very close to that of the burning wraith. It was just that he didn't have that oppressive dark red fiery glow. He was more like a shadow of nothingness. Luo Nan still wanted to carefully experience it for a bit. But after a short period of muddle-headedness, he sensed a chill that rapidly increased in intensity. It was simply like he was raging through a world of ice and snow with his naked body. The cruel cold wind sliced at his body like blades. The incorporeal cold wind was simply unavoidable. The incorporeal soul didn't have the effect of splattering blood in all directions, but the intense feeling of pain was real and real. It was very clear that the situation was tilting in a dangerous direction. And it was clearly closely related to the hasty and passive out-of-body experience. Luo Nan's first thought was to hurry and return to his main body. But right now, his mind and the chains coexisted. They were all bound to the burning wraith. He was completely muddle-headed as to how to unbind and how to break free. The more muddle-headed he was, the more he needed to do something. Luo Nan did 3 things in this life-threatening moment. First, he made a comparison. Which was more painful, the cold wind cutting the soul or the psychotropic drug composition cutting the nerves? Conclusion: there seemed to be no difference. Second, he made a confirmation. In the end, was there still a connection between the soul and the main body? Conclusion: the main body was in quite a bit of pain over there. Third, he raised a question. Since there was a connection between the soul and the main body, where was the connection? Conclusion: I don't know anything else, but it certainly existed on the visualization plane and the draft drawing. Even though it was a bit abstract. The first conclusion strengthened his conviction. The second structure gave him a clear direction. The third conclusion gave him a method. At this very moment, his firm conviction transformed into another wave of chanting sounds. The first 4 words rumbled within the visualization plane and within the soul. My heart's a prison. The visualization plane still blended together with the draft drawing. Between reality and illusion, the messy yet distinct layers of the prison building seemed to be truly constructed. It was piled up layer by layer, covering the limits of Luo Nan's range of perception like a dark cloud. The out-of-body soul appeared to be far away from the main body, but it was actually still within the range of the prison building. The burning wraith was the same. The heavily chained crow shuttled back and forth within this seemingly illusory building, transforming into beams, pillars, thick walls, prisons, torture tools. And it was also at this moment that Luo Nan truly understood the essence of the heavily chained crow. No matter what kind of prison it was the embodiment of coercive rules. Coercive power was certainly the #1 priority. There must be the power of punishment when facing a disobedient prisoner. The burning wraith appeared to be fleeing far away, but as long as it didn't truly throw off the shackles of the chains, it would inevitably suffer a merciless suppression. The heavily chained crow hummed in an instant, carrying out Luo Nan's will. The power stored deep within it was finally displayed. As the result of the accumulation of ideas and inspiration, every strand of the heavily chained crow divided into silver strands. Every chain constructed was linked to Luo Nan's mind. This movement was tantamount to piercing the bound burning wraith from the inside to the outside. It was wrapped and twisted. It was so much so that it was directly sliced and analyzed. A large amount of information was fed back. It was too late to sort through in a short time. The burning wraith hissed in pain. There were no sound waves, but there were seemingly substantial psychic waves that spread to the surroundings. It seemed that this painful emotion was far too intense. The wall lights in the long corridor of the warship suddenly dimmed. In the next moment, the entire row of red warning lights lit up. A tangible and intangible warning sound penetrated through the entire space of the warship. Warning. Warning. Invasion of mutants. I repeat. Invasion of mutants. Level 3 mutant state. Darksider lifeform has appeared. All conventional armed personnel enter combat positions. Prepare tranquilizers. Enter standby state of AI. Activating the deep blue platform. The burners have entered a state of emergency. Chapter 17. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? The web provides you with wonderful novels to read. In a short few seconds, a dark red alarm light spread a tense and serious atmosphere to every corner of the transport ship. Although this sort of situation was rare for the military, there were always rules to follow. It was enough as long as the various departments and systems obeyed orders. But the problem was that there weren't only soldiers on the transport ship. The moment the alarm rang out, the engineers of Quantum Corporation in Area C who were setting up the site and debugging the equipment were all dumbfounded. They stopped what they were doing and looked at each other, not knowing what to do. The supervisor present, Lieutenant Colonel Liu, had the highest military rank and was also quite experienced. He immediately said, "All non-combat personnel cease work and await further instructions." Lieutenant Colonel Liu was also busy contacting his superiors to confirm the situation. It wasn't easy to get clear instructions. He raised his head to look for the person in charge of Quantum Corporation, but the corner of his eye twitched. As the head of security, Liang Yonghua was sitting at the edge of the construction site. He didn't even raise his head as he fiddled with his wristband, ignoring the changes in the outside world. "They're bragging about how calm you are." Lieutenant Colonel Liu had always disliked this sort of arrogant and conceited fellow. He immediately straightened his face and walked over with large strides. Just as he was about to speak, a swift and fierce man wearing a sky-blue security uniform rushed in front of him and asked Yan Yonghua for instructions. "Captain, we've entered a state of emergency. Do you want to warm it up?" "Warm it up?" "Old Black." Liang Yonghua still didn't raise his head as he calmly said, "You're wearing an exoskeleton armor and leaping around the warship. Have you ever thought about the feelings of the military?" "You haven't, right? If you haven't, then ask Lieutenant Colonel Liu." Lieutenant Colonel Liu had just walked over when he was stopped by these words. His imposing manner weakened. It was at this moment that Liang Yonghua raised his head to look at him. "Lieutenant Colonel Liu, what do you think?" The corner of Lieutenant Colonel Liu's eye twitched twice. In the end, he still forcefully held back his anger and forced himself to speak. "Command. The invasion of the dark side of life forms has a high probability of being related to the incident at the Research and Development District. Quantum Corporation's burners will participate in the pursuit and will temporarily be assigned to the Special Forces Squad 7. This is the Communications Identification Code." Liang Yonghua received the relevant data and nodded. "Very well then, I accept the order. But Lieutenant Colonel Liu, I suspect this accident has something to do with the people detained on the warship. I hope the military can increase their surveillance efforts to avoid any unexpected situations. F***CK your grandpa." Lieutenant Colonel Liu finally flew into a rage when a problem was pointed out in the matter he was in charge of. He couldn't be bothered to say anything more, so he turned around and left with a dark expression. Liang Yonghua didn't say much. He stood up and led Blackie in another direction. On the way, he sent a set of data to Blackie. If that idiot wants to come, he'll need some time to vent his anger. There won't be any changes to the defense. Wait for an opportunity to move to Area A2. Make a big move. If you meet this person, create some accidents. The data was projected on Blackie's retina, showing the handsome and quiet face of a young man. Love, go small, say. Netco Old Black was expressionless. He only nodded slightly, engraving that young face deep in his heart. The alarms and warning lights did not stop. Under the flickering dark red light, the prison building that was built between reality and illusion began to collapse after a brief moment of glory. Soon, it turned into ruins and returned to nothingness. After all, Luo Nan hadn't truly constructed a reasonable structure yet. There were many overly casual future conceptions involved within. Being able to temporarily appear for a period of time was already a pretty decent confirmation. Of course, the most important thing was that the burning wraith was already completely unable to stir up a storm. Walala! Walala! The heavily chained crow continued to retreat. No matter how much the burning wraith struggled, the chains that bound its body continued to dissect, slice, and analyze. The layers of the binding force gradually pointed towards the core essence. A layer of faint bloody light could be seen clearly flowing on the dark base of the chains. The bloody light changed against the flow, drawing back a marvelous heat. It flowed without end. This was the energy that came from the burning wraith. The accumulation of information analysis began to display its effect. A portion of the burning wraith's energy circulation mechanism was cracked. The chains drew back in time, giving Luo Nan support while weakening the burning wraith's strength. Such an outcome was truly timely for Luo Nan, who had left his body in a hurry. The energy poured into Luo Nan's soul. It was like a mouthful of hot soup in a state of extreme hunger. It was like a thick layer of clothing wrapped around one's body in the middle of winter. The results were immediate. The cold wind blades were immediately blocked outside. Within the space of 2 to 3 breaths, even Luo Nan's main body had the corresponding feedback. The state of hunger that was nearing its limit was somewhat alleviated. The situation was always like this. The burning wraith that had lost a large amount of blood had already turned from a wild boar that ran around randomly into a sled dog that wasn't very obedient. Then, it irreversibly transformed into a dead dog. Luo Nan saw the dead dog a few seconds later. The burning wraith was indeed well behaved. It floated in the air sickly. There weren't too many changes to its outer appearance. Even if there were changes, it wouldn't be seen. Only the outer layer of flames had clearly dimmed quite a bit. But there was something very eye-catching. Behind this toy, let's just call it behind for the time being. It dragged a very long tail. The heavily chained crow continued to control, slice, and analyze the burning wraith without end. And it seemed that this would continue for a very long period of time. Even though Luo Nan was in his soul state, he still let out a long breath out of habit. He had finally resolved this inexplicable trouble. He could finally put his energy back on the plane of reality. Luo Nan naturally paid attention to the alarm that resonated throughout the entire ship. Let's not talk about anything else. The terrible negative term mutant was already enough to explain a lot of things. But what was a Darksider life form? Luo Nan searched his memories, but there were no results. A clear change had already occurred in the surrounding situation at this time. There wasn't a shadow of a single person within the long internal corridor. But long and narrow cracks had opened up on the walls and floor of the corridor at an unknown time. Pale white smoke could be seen emitting from the cracks, quickly pervading the entire corridor. At the end of the corridor, the muffled sound of footsteps could be heard. 3 majestic exoskeleton armors formed a battle formation. They advanced forward step by step within the misty smoke. Aside from the smoke, the corridor was completely empty. There wasn't a single thing to hide in. The people on the other side looked as if they were facing a great enemy. It was as if there was an incorporeal monster that could hunt and kill at any time. Luo Nan suddenly had a very marvelous feeling when he witnessed this scene. Incorporeal. Incorporeal. Why does it seem like this group of people have come to deal with me? The smoke within the corridor grew thicker and thicker. Luo Nan's mind stirred slightly. He didn't engage in the galloping horse style of charging forward like a violent hurricane. Instead, he pulled the half-dead burning wraith and circled around the corridor. He was like a true specter as he passed through the metal wall and entered the adjacent cabin. Then he charged forward all the way towards the direction of the main body. Chapter 18. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Xiaofan provides you with wonderful novels to read. After Luo Nan flew past a few cabins, he discovered, actually, the situation here was quite similar to the situation in the corridor. Several transmission ports were opened within the cabins. Faint white smoke flowed out in an unending stream, and the concentration was even higher due to the cramped space. Many of the soldiers were fully armed and standing in the smoke. Their expressions did not change. It was obvious that they were very familiar with this situation. Of course, the smoke was definitely not poisonous. Luo Nan had paid special attention to the effect the smoke had on the soul body due to his previous sense of danger. But judging from the current situation, there was nothing unusual. He suppressed his doubts at the bottom of his heart and focused more on experiencing the feeling of passing through walls. Is this what an out-of-body experience looks like? Luo Nan used various methods to penetrate through 7 to 8 metal walls in a row before confirming his own state once more. His grandfather's formatting theory was a field of metaphysical knowledge to a large degree. Luo Nan would read a few books on philosophy, metaphysics, and mystic arts in addition to his usual research. It was not a difficult task for him to accept his current state. However, Luo Nan also sensed that this ability of his was far from reaching the level of perfection when compared to the ancient records and the knowledge of the mystic arts. When he just left his body, he'd almost been dismembered by the cold air of the outside world. Thinking about it now, he still had lingering fears. He had to rely on the burning wraith, this external fuel tank, to ensure that he could cruise for a long time. But no matter what, the feeling of dog sled and riding the clouds was completely different. There was a huge difference between passive and active states. This was the first time Luo Nan had relied purely on his own will to move after his out-of-body experience. Of course, he wasn't used to all sorts of things. Love, go small, say, Netka most of the time. There will be some redundant actions and thoughts. More importantly, he had not truly adapted to observing the world in the form of a soul. Luo Nan had a deep understanding of the nervous system. He quickly discovered that on the soul plane, the traditional 5 senses of sight, hearing, nose, tongue, body and mind had undergone a large-scale transformation in their operating mechanisms. The visual and auditory processes on this plane were actually an inefficient process. Luo Nan was like a radar in his soul state. He was constantly receiving all sorts of wavelengths from the outside world. The source was so rich that it far exceeded the types of signals that the human nervous system could receive and process. If he stuck to his habit, most of these signals would naturally be lost. Only some of the signals that the nervous system normally processed would be channeled in and transferred to the body for processing before the results were presented in the form of the 5 senses. Not to mention the problem of losing a large amount of waveband signals, even the processed signals would be distorted to a large extent due to the lack of real stimulation to the nervous system. At the very least, he had almost lost his sense of touch. Seems like it's better to deal with it directly. But in this case, how to compile it became a big problem. Luo Nan deliberately went to sense and gather information. He immediately tumbled a few times due to the chaotic and complex amount of information in his surroundings. It seemed that it would be a long process for him to adapt to life on the soul plane. That is to say, with the change of thought, the level and range of the soul sense would be partially expanded. It was like a classical radio, in which one could occasionally hear something interesting amidst the clattering noise. This was an extremely novel experience. Luo Nan didn't mind spending a bit of energy to mull over it. At this moment, a few intermittent keywords caught his attention. Luo Nan's mind stirred slightly, and a small deviation occurred in the direction he was heading. While he was releasing his senses, he was still separated by several layers of metal walls, yet clamorous noises assaulted his face. Luo Nan actually felt a strange sense of intimacy as he entered. This was because this was the place where Lian Yu, Li Xueqing, and the other rich kids were imprisoned. Luo Nan never thought that he would be able to enter and observe the environment he once stayed in such a marvelous way. He clearly existed, yet the others were completely unaware of it. It gave off a marvelous feeling of unreality. Lian Yu and the other rich kids were completely unaware that a specter had appeared beside them. They were having a great time arguing. Facts proved that one had to first find the cause of everything within oneself. The atmosphere between the group of rich kids wasn't any better after a certain pervert was imprisoned by himself. Because of the series of events involving the banned drugs, the imprisonment, and Li Xueqing, the group of people went from lamenting to complaining to arguing and clamoring. The atmosphere unwittingly became tense again. The alarm of the mutant and the strange situation of smoke pervading the air caused them to quiet down for a while. But it was unknown who took the lead and arguments appeared once more. But this time, the content of the argument had a bit of meaning. The focal point of their argument was the mutant species. The evidence for the mutant species spreading through the ocean is conclusive. You don't need to talk nonsense, okay? Are your ears stuffed with shit? Why would I deny the spreading through the ocean? I'm just saying that there's a lot of evidence pointing to the appearance of a new source of infection. The source of infection came from your mouth, right? F***CK. The so-called mutant species referred to the large-scale, highly contagious, mutated phenomena that began to appear in the later stages of World War III. It was simply the most destructive and terrifying example of the world's biology. The most popular explanation for its origin was this. In the depths of some oceanic trench in the Pacific Ocean, a door leading to the depths of the Earth's crust had been opened. Or perhaps it was an even more inconceivable place. Therefore, the fatal pollution came from the ocean. It passed through the marine biosphere to invade the freshwater system and the continent's ecosphere. In the short span of a few years, all sorts of plants, fungi, insects, animals, and even a small portion of humans received varying degrees of pollution. Under the catalysis of genetic mutation, they developed into all sorts of vicious and cruel monstrous life forms. For a time, they were at the very top of the food chain even now. Before the appearance of Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue platform, humanity was in dire straits when faced with such a terrifying species. They could only rely on large metropolitan areas to carry out their defenses. It was truly unbearable to recall. Because it was a matter of life and death, the mutant species was undoubtedly the hottest topic after World War III. Then you explain. What is a dark-sider life form? The Mutant Species Encyclopedia was published in the year 2091. I have the complete set. There are 17 major species and over 2,000 types of mutations. Which eye of yours saw a dark-sider life form? Sure, if you think your encyclopedia is a holy scripture, then I'm convinced. You're so stupid that I'm convinced. Wait. Finally, someone came out to stop the quarrel. There's no need to be angry about this matter. A new species of mutant can jump out at any time. We're all amateurs. It's impossible for us to figure it out. Hey, Tauzi, Your old man is a big financial backer of the field laboratory. Have you ever heard of this thing before? Lu Tao, who wore vintage gold-rimmed glasses, looked refined and refined. He could be considered a small anomaly in the crowd. He normally didn't speak much, but he had a certain shocking flavor. He had been holding back his big move as soon as he heard about the Darksider life form. Now that he finally had the opportunity, he chuckled. Darksider life form. Treat it like a specter. It's a pretty good angle to cut into. Chapter 19. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? We provide you with wonderful novels to read. The cabin was quiet for a moment. Then someone laughed. Spectre. Are you talking about ghosts? You can interpret it however you want. In any case, from what I can see, a so-called Darksider life form is a kind of thing that you can't see or touch. It's something that floats around you. Spectre is a more suitable description. Towsy, you're so disgusting. You're so creepy. A pretty vase seized the opportunity to act spoiled. Actually, when Lu Tao mentioned it, the group of people didn't think much of it. But after being tainted by the coquettish voice of the pretty vase, quite a few people had goosebumps. Some people turned their heads to look at the billowing smoke all around them. They really did feel a bit creeped out in their hearts. Lu Tao actually loved this kind of tone the most. He adjusted his glasses and pretended to be calm. That's the truth. Regarding the Darksider life form, it's only been 1 or 2 years since the industry put forth a related concept. Only a few papers have been published. Apart from the various high-end laboratories, the only ones who are more familiar with it are the military. Looking at the response of the warship, it can be seen that they've had many dealings with the Darksider life form. This is a good thing. The group of scoundrels really detested Lu Tao's habit of keeping them in suspense. Some people were already impatient. We can't see or touch them. What the hell is there to research? Don't tell me you're thinking that people are stupid and have too much money to swindle funds. Get lost. Lu Tao laughed and scolded. He finally cut to the chase. Why did I mention the military? It's because the military lists the Darksider life form as a special type of mutant. However, the vast majority of research institutes hold different opinions. They believe that the two are not the same thing. The closest way of saying it is to guess that this thing might be the primal virus that causes the mutation. It was still the pretty vase from before. But this time she was truly frightened. She wasn't the only one. Everyone's expressions weren't too good. The shadow of the mutant species was always hanging over everyone's head. Even the rich second generation was no exception. The mutant species that had already taken form could still arouse their interest in research and discussion. But if it was the mutant itself that made people wish they were dead, and it was a monster that everyone avoided like the plague. Lu Tao spread his hands. Can you guys not scare yourselves? What I said was just one of the most ridiculous guesses. This thing has almost no resemblance to a virus. In comparison, even the so-called dark matter life form is more reliable than it. The beautiful vase slapped him coquettishly and automatically entered the flirting mode. Everyone around them was cursing. Lu Tao felt that he had been wronged. He simply didn't try to be mysterious and directly gave a simple introduction. In short, these Darksider life forms are like specters. They truly exist, but they can't be seen or touched. According to the nature determined in the laboratory, it can be determined that it almost never comes into contact with common particles, does not react with electromagnetic waves, and does not actively emit radiation. This also meant that in most natural environments, it was impossible to directly observe them using any conventional means. Well, under normal circumstances, they won't interact with anything in this world. Someone laughed. If it doesn't work, what's the threat? The people on the ship are all nervous. Are they trying to scare us? I mean, under normal circumstances. Have you ever thought about why these things are called living things? This is because under certain circumstances, these things have the ability to interfere with the material plane. Moreover, they have a certain purpose. What purpose? There are thousands and thousands of variations. But according to statistics, nearly 40% of the cases where interference occurs are interference. Stimulation of the creature's emotions, causing people to lose concentration, be irritated, easily angered, sensitive, and so on. Luo Nan, who was listening to the side, was finally stirred. He sized up the burning wraith once more. This fellow was still in a dead dog state right now, but everything that had happened before had perfectly verified Lu Tao's description. The dark side of life form is extremely dangerous. Remember, the parts that we can't observe are meaningless to us because they don't interact with us at all. But as long as we are able to discover them, they are certainly threatening. This is because they are attempting to influence and disturb our plane. How do they disturb? It's very simple. There's an old saying, know thyself and know thy enemy. Under normal circumstances, the dark side or life form doesn't interact with us. But once they have an intention, they must first understand us, make contact with us, and collect our information. This is like an active radar. Normally, if the radar isn't turned on, no one would be able to discover its existence. But if they search with a certain purpose, they will certainly emit a beam and expose their position. Luo Nan, who was observing the burning wraith, was suddenly startled. His attention became unprecedentedly focused. Of course. The dark side or life form is 10,000 times more hidden than a radar. They don't even need to emit a detection beam or anything. They just need to absorb the various wavebands in the air. Then they can analyze and process them in a way that we are unable to understand. And this is also the only opportunity we have to detect them. Lu Tao was high from talking. His arm pointed at the surrounding mist. Do you see this shadow mist? This mist releases a type of special particle. They are extremely sensitive to the various wavebands in the air. Once they discover which direction has a relatively concentrated nature change in the waveband, they can transmit the relevant data to the central AI through various sensors. They can conduct analysis and determine the probability of the dark side or life form appearing. Lian Yu, who hadn't spoken all this time, also became interested. Her specialty just so happened to be communications. Taoster, you know quite a bit about this. Lu Tao was waiting for these words. He immediately pretended to be calm. This sort of shadow mist combat technique was developed by a laboratory in the wilderness that my family funded. At this time, there was naturally no lack of people supporting him. F***CK Taoster, you've hidden yourself quite deeply. You guys have earned quite a bit from this technology. Not bad. Not bad. Lu Tao was beaming with laughter. He felt extremely refreshed in his heart. But Luo Nan, who was floating beside him, had a different kind of mood at this time. He looked at the surrounding mist and was actually a bit stupefied for a time. Lian Yu, who hadn't spoken much, asked at this time, it's so hard to even discover the dark side or life form. How do we deal with it? Right now, there's only the burner. In fact, the discovery of the dark side or life form happened after Quantum Corporation introduced the burner and the Deep Blue platform. It can be seen from actual combat that the burner has a relatively high sensitivity towards the dark side or life form. Only the burner can control the Deep Blue walkers. Only by establishing the archetype format and igniting the format of fire can they cause direct damage to the dark side or life form. Then, Lian Yu still wanted to ask, but she didn't expect a long beep to open the cabin's outer door. The sliding metal door was still moving when a strong and vigorous figure leaped in from the mist. A thick firearm was set up and tiny red dots of light danced chaotically throughout the room. They streaked across the faces of the rich kids who were at a loss as to what to do. Get down. All of you get down. A fierce and unyielding voice penetrated into their eardrums through the amplification of the loudspeaker. Everyone, crawl forward in order. Immediately go outside. There will be people outside to receive you. The person who had thrown himself into the room was certainly a rather brave and capable character. But after staying in the army for a long time, it was inevitable that he would overlook the fact that this group of rich kids before his eyes really weren't battle-hardened warriors. They were already completely scared silly when faced with this sudden situation. It was unknown who it was that cleared his throat after a mere half a second, but a sharp cry filled the entire cabin. Being spurred on by the cry, the restlessness of fear engulfed the hearts of everyone like a storm. Chapter 20. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Xiaofan provides you with wonderful novels to read. Luo Nan had to say that he was grateful to this fierce warrior who charged in first. Love, Gobe small, say. Netku his opponent's misjudgment gave him a chance to react. Luo Nan made a decision the instant the shriek rang out. His telepathic thoughts pierced through the heavily chained crow to stimulate the burning wraith. He forcefully pierced the burning wraith awake from its dead dog state and left it in place. The main body of his soul followed the same path he came from and rolled back. Luo Nan's judgment was based on the worst possible situation. He didn't hold any hope of getting lucky. As it turned out, it couldn't have been more timely. The military's reaction was lightning fast. Once they discovered the true nature of the screaming second-generation rich kids, they didn't expect to cooperate at all and immediately took action. Inside the room, the fierce warrior, who was the first to rush in, raised the thick gun in his hand. Amidst the roar, a dazzling electric light shot out. This was more effective than any order. Although the screams were even more ear-piercing, the group of second-generation rich kids immediately prostrated themselves on the ground. Other than the fierce warrior, no one else was left standing in the room. Everyone scrambled to the gate that had just been opened, rolling and crawling over. The fierce warrior finally took control of the situation. He raised his head, which was wearing a fully enclosed helmet, and aimed the translucent panel at the empty upper part of the cabin. In a normal person's field of vision, there was nothing but churning smoke and smoke. However, Fierce Warrior obviously didn't think so. His right hand swiped over the switch button of the gun and changed the empty bullet mode to single-shot mode. The muzzle made a muffled sound. In the next moment, a large cloud of fire rose in the half-closed cabin, almost covering the entire upper half of the cabin, like a violent and reckless miniature flame bomb. Right now, Luo Nan was already 2 cabins away. The straight-line distance was over a dozen meters. But since the chains were still fused with the burning wraith, it was very hard to pull them away. The information from the other side was unavoidably transmitted back. Luo Nan's mind trembled the instant the fiery cloud soared. A substantial impact traveled along the chains. Even though Zhang Xian was just an ethereal soul, it felt as though he had been punched in the chest, leaving him in a terrible state. Luo Nan was certain that the true destructive power of this shot was absolutely not the seemingly violent flames. This was because Luo Nan did not feel the transmission of heat at this moment. Instead, it was an attack power that directly reached the soul plane. If he was already like this, then there was no need to mention the burning wraith that was still staying in the cabin. It had just woken up from the dead dog state, and was still somewhat muddle-headed. The red cloud exploded overhead, crossing the boundary between reality and illusion, and acting on its body. In an instant, the burning wraith's body unexpectedly shrunk by a circle from the explosion. It clearly suffered damage. This sort of flame bullet-like ammunition was clearly made to deal with the Darksider life form. Its effects were immediate. However, it wasn't easy to reload the ammunition. After one shot, the fierce warrior retreated and reloaded at the same time. He couldn't complete it in a short time. However, it would be too naive to think that there was a chance just because of that. One person's skills were limited, but he couldn't fight against the other side's numbers. After the first flame bullet was fired, there was a succession of bullet trajectories that cut in from outside the cabin. At least 5 of the same type of ammunition shot into the cabin and exploded. For a time, the cloud of fire churned and the temperature of the entire cabin rose by at least 20 degrees. The soaring temperature looked frightening, but it was actually meaningless. It proved that the destructive power of the ammunition had shifted beyond the conventional plane. The burning wraith that remained in the cabin had the most right to speak. Not only did this wave of flame bullets have a direct attack on the soul plane, it even had a viscous ability. The burning wraith also attempted to flee when it suffered the attack. But it was as if a bucket of glue had been poured into the surrounding void, making it difficult for the burning wraith to move. Perhaps it was some sort of incorporeal and powerful magnetic field? Luo Nan continued to ponder as he retreated. Right now he could see that the military had clearly formed a set of effective methods to deal with the Darksider life form. If he had stayed behind just now, it was truly unknown what would have happened to him. Luo Nan's route of retreat and method had been carefully considered. From Lu Tao's introduction, he roughly understood that the Shadow Mist's capture of the Darksider life form wasn't really a matter of seeing it. Rather, it was a method of calculation that had a problem with probability. In other words, it was very likely that the military didn't know the true form, quantity, and relationship between the Darksider life form. Luo Nan pushed out the burning wraith that he had just obtained without the slightest hesitation. With the burning wraith attracting firepower, he could be considered safe up until now at least. But at this moment, the burning wraith that was bound within the cabin had finally aroused its vicious nature after it had suffered a series of attacks. The wraith's body, which was already riddled with holes, suddenly shrunk. Its originally incorporeal shadow body became a bit more solid. There was even an instant where the outline of a body became even clearer. The heavily chained crow that was still locked together with the burning wraith transmitted concrete information. But Luo Nan wasn't able to discern what it was for a time. He just felt that it was some sort of vicious beast. This incorporeal vicious beast faced the sky and roared in the next moment. Psychic waves that were nearly tangible filled the cabin in an instant. They penetrated through the metal walls and rapidly spread. From the moment the gunshot rang out, the burning cloud of fire above their heads simply scared the rich kids to the point of pissing their pants. They all screamed for help right now. Some people didn't even have the strength to crawl cleanly. Luckily, the soldiers outside the door saw through their nature and changed tactics. They promptly extended their hands and dragged them out. But the burning wraith's roar arrived at this time. Actually, no one heard the sound. But under the sweeping psychic waves, an irrepressible fear of death erupted in everyone's hearts. At least 3 people pissed their pants in this instant. There were even some who directly fainted. But on another level, through the chains and through the burning wraith, Luo Nan saw that this group of rich kids had already collapsed in the face of fear. Between their mouths and noses, between the pores of their bodies, a very strange thing began to ooze out. Countless dark red specks of light floated up. They were like specks of dust floating under the sunlight. But the dim glimmer clearly contained a marvelous energy. It was like a strange spore, and its source was the dozen or so shivering rich second-generation heirs inside and outside the cabin. Practically everyone's body sprayed out these dark red spores, interweaving with each other. As a whole, they formed a thin glowing mist that covered the entire cabin. The density of the glowing mist rose far too quickly. There were large amounts of spores exchanging in and out of their bodies at every moment. The density was so great that it simply burned with a layer of gloomy flames. Finally, the density of the glowing mist reached a certain limit. It spontaneously bubbled up and submerged the burning wraith within. Only a vague outline of its outline could be seen. At first glance, it looked like Luo Nan had sketched the wraith in the beginning. It was just that it was much more concise. There were many places that had already broken away from the structure of a picture. It had become extremely abstract. As a whole, it was just like an enlarged strange symbol. The burning wraith locked onto its target the instant the symbol appeared. The fierce soldier, who had always been at the very front, had a sturdy body wrapped in exoskeleton armor. It was as if it had been struck by lightning. Then it violently twitched and fell backwards. However, a faint smoke rose from the tangible body, and then it showed signs of dissipating. Chapter 21. A Genius in 1 Second Remembers Love? Speak Net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Luo Nan was familiar with the series of circumstances that occurred within the cabin. One was the roar of fear. It was practically a replay of Luo Nan's experience on the viaduct. And on the soul plane, a few more essential things were exposed. Looking at the other people's expressions, it was clear that they knew nothing about the spore. Then, there were the fallen fierce warriors. Luo Nan felt the unforeseen events that happened to the fierce soldier. This was because in the moment when he was forcefully pulled out of his body, this dark and incorporeal vibration penetrated his body, forcibly blasting his soul out. Looking at it now, this was truly a battering ram that acted directly on the soul plane. The fleshly body on the plane of reality was completely unable to defend against a single hammer strike. It directly struck the soul. It was filled with the meaning of the mystic arts. The fierce soldier clearly didn't have the ability to leave his body. This time, things were probably far from good. Luo Nan's mind stirred. He had no enmity with the military's combat personnel. He didn't wish for someone to lose their life because of the inexplicable dark-sider life form. He hesitated for a moment before issuing an order to the burning wraith for the first time since the fight began. The burning wraith was slightly sluggish within the cabin. Right now it was driving the dark flames to burn away all the surrounding binding forces, allowing it to regain its freedom. Moreover, its strength had increased explosively. But Luo Nan's order reached its core plane through the chains, making it hard for it to refuse. The burning wraith split off a streak of bloody light to roll up the overflowing smoke from the fierce soldier's body, forcibly stuffing it back in. It circled around in the air, ignoring the exploding clouds of fire as if they were nothing. It carried the red light of the dark flames as it escaped from the cabin. And at this time, Luo Nan's soul body was silently following a distance of over a dozen meters. According to Lu Tao's words, The military used the shadow mist to detect the Darksider lifeform.
This was to observe each information waveband to see whether or not it had a tendency to interfere with changes on the plane of reality.
Luo Nen didn't understand the calculation method involved, but he knew that even if he was forced by the burning wraith to do something beyond his abilities, he was able to maintain his current state for a long time. This was mostly due to his own format. His soul was in the out-of-body state. He naturally had a tendency to interfere with reality. Otherwise, he would be in the chaotic darkness, and he would become inhuman. How was this possible?
In this way, it was very possible that he was a natural signal source within the shadow mist. If he and the burning wraith were to go in the opposite direction, it would be unknown who would be the first to be caught. Since he couldn't create a diversion, he could only pull the wool over everyone's eyes. He pulled the chain, maintaining a distance that was neither too far nor too close. He followed behind the burning wraith, at the same time carefully adjusting his route. Although the current burning wraith was still at a level that ordinary people's eyes couldn't see, however, due to the frequent interference of the real world, the military's detection system could be said to be blazing with a fierce light. The well-trained soldiers outside only lagged behind for about half a second before they turned their guns and used that special fire cloud to seal off the corridor.
However, the burning wraith used the move, Fearful Roar. It used a peculiar method to absorb other people's fearful emotions for its own use. Its strength rose explosively for a time. It was a bit strenuous for Luo Nan to control it, let alone these soldiers who could only rely on special equipment to deal with the enemy. Even though the fire cloud pervaded most of the long corridor, the burning wraith still walked how it wanted to walk. It occasionally used the siege hammer to shoot. Even though Luo Nan suppressed it over and over again, it didn't cause as much damage as the first strike. However, those who were hit would fall into a state of unconsciousness. They didn't even know what was going on when facing an invisible enemy. Such a treacherous situation really was an absolute test of the willpower of the human heart. Even soldiers who had gone through strict training were able to maintain uninterrupted firepower according to the drill manual. It was hard to avoid the feelings of fear and panic in their hearts. This was a difficult knot to unravel when facing the burning wraith. So much so that the number of strange spores in the long corridor increased once more. They didn't just come from the bodies of the collapsed rich kids. They also came from the bodies of the soldiers in battle. Large amounts of spores floated up, infected, and exchanged. The magic of fear was like an avalanche. It pressed down on everyone present. The combat formation formed by the elite soldiers and the rhythm of the successive firepower had already shown visible disarray. 1, 2, 3. 7, 8. Including the one who was still lying in the cabin, there were 9 well-trained elite soldiers dressed in advanced exoskeleton armor. They formed a combat squad that was enough to contend against powerful mutants in the wilderness. But under the fierce might of the burning wraith, they actually didn't have the strength to fight back. Luo Nen observed this scene. His mood was a bit complicated. Just this morning, he was still a suspect who had been forcibly detained by the police. He could only obediently act like a grandson when faced with violence.
But after a short few hours, his Dominator strength already possessed the ability to directly defeat a small elite squad of the military.
This strength was powerful and terrifying. It was mysterious and realistic.
However, one could infer from the scene before their eyes that the planetary government was in a terrible mess when faced with the wilderness, faced with a mutant, and faced with the Darksider life form.
Luo Nan wasn't a good child who worried about the country and the people, but he remembered a sentence. Every person was only 300 kilometers away from the wilderness. On this planet, every person faced the threat of the mutant. And now it looked like this threat was much greater than what the government and the media usually publicized. In the end, Luo Nan didn't have a melancholic temperament. He quickly recovered from his emotional state and slightly controlled the fierce flames of the burning wraith. At the same time, he corrected his path and prepared to continue piercing through walls to return to his body. But the burning wraith transmitted a restless reaction in the next moment. It was just a hair slower than the burning wraith. Luo Nan had an inexplicable feeling as well. He shifted his attention, but he heard a wave of muffled footsteps. At the end of the long corridor was a bright color like the azure sea. It turned a corner and approached step by step. It was also an exoskeleton armor. The head was a bit flat, and it had a multi-angular helmet. It was once known as the most masculine exoskeleton design. But from Luo Nan's perspective, it was like a praying mantis pouncing on its prey.
The reflection of light from every corner possessed a penetrating power like the edge of a blade.
A low and fine hissing sound rang from the back of this completely sealed helmet. At the same time, the exoskeleton's shoulders, chest, abdomen, ribs, and every other part of the four limbs all had minute deformations. The entire armor seemed to have expanded by a size in an instant. And marvelous patterns of light began to appear on the coating layer of the armor. They appeared flat, circular, hyperbolic, and all sorts of other shapes. Fine electric currents seemed to be leaping about on the outer shell of the armor. But upon closer inspection, how could it be electric currents? It was clearly a layer of fine interweaving flames. They stuck rigidly to the outer shell of the armor that was deep blue like the sea. Only the dazzling light of the flames swayed faintly. Deep Blue Walker. Archetype format form. Many thoughts jumped in Luo Nan's mind in succession. Finally, they all came to one place. Format of fire.
Before this thought had even finished, a translucent light of fire sprinkled out from the body of the Deep Blue Walker that advanced with large strides. The quality was crystal clear, like a soundless overflowing wave of water. It pushed through the long corridor and interweaved with the all-encompassing cloud of fire emitted by the military. An astonishing reaction was produced in an instant.
Chapter 22. Genius in 1 second. Remember Love Go? Speak, Net. Providing you with wonderful novels to read. Gurgle. Gurgle. Luo Nan could clearly hear the clamorous sound of boiling water. In fact, the majority of the long corridor was filled with fire clouds that were boiling. The swelling and bursting dark red bubbles were piled together. At first glance, it looked like a lava lake in the ground. But from the perspective of the burning wraith, these bubbles were like a strong detergent with a barrel-rolling effect. The spores stirred up by the roaring of fear were immediately annihilated the moment they came into contact with the boiling fire clouds. Even the power that was already operating effectively, such as the gloomy dark flames that revolved around the wraith's body, also received enormous interference. A vortex formed in the void. 3 types of flames.
Whether it was the burning wraith, the Deep Blue Walker, or the flames released by the soldiers, as long as they were sucked into the vortex, there would be no reaction. If this was all, then the burning wraith wouldn't be considered to have fallen into a disadvantage. But the problem was, who would want to fight you one-on-one on this military transport ship? A muffled bang rang out. A blue light suddenly burst forth from a certain cabin on the side of the corridor. A robust figure rushed out from the side. It was actually another Deep Blue Walker. Its propulsion system had clearly been pushed to the limit. It was much more valiant than the previous one, directly pouncing forward. The alloy dagger in its hand was raised horizontally. The same translucent format of fire flickered on its surface. So accurate. Luo Nan nearly suspected whether or not this slayer possessed the ability to directly perceive the Darksider lifeform. The direction of the dagger's edge was actually cutting straight at the area where the burning wraith was located. It was near the center. The burning wraith's reaction was a bit slow. Perhaps the distance between the two was too close, or perhaps it lacked a sense of danger from a physical attack. Only when the fiery light of the dagger neared its body did it blur its figure in an attempt to dodge.
In the end, it was still too late.
No matter if it was the outer layer of gloomy dark flames or the inner layer of near-nothingness of the shadow wraith, a long scar that could be seen with the naked eye was directly cut open.
Everything within was transformed into nothingness. On Luo Nan's side, the information transmitted by the burning wraith suddenly turned chaotic. Then a ruthless power burst forth. The burning wraith's vicious nature had already been aroused. It completely disregarded Luo Nan's previous orders. The siege hammer no longer held back and directly struck. The Slayer's protective format of fire abruptly darkened, and its body, which was still gliding through the air, lost control. The fighter's emotions were completely displayed with resentment and fury. Yan Yongbo walked forward. His usually grave and stern face revealed a smile for the first time. He extended his hand towards the fighter. "Captain He, controlling your emotions is the #1 task when dealing with the Darksider lifeform. Moreover, you've already done it to perfection just now." "I know very well how I've done things." The fighter simply didn't pay attention to Yan Yongbo's good intentions. Its voice was low and cold. Then it used the assistance system to stand up and recalibrated its armor. "Captain He," the
the fighter turned the translucent panel of its helmet around to face Yan Yongbua. Quantum Corporation's professional quality can be considered trustworthy. I hope we can cooperate in the future and reduce unnecessary mistakes. I treasure this time very much. Yan Yongbua faintly smiled. That's only natural. The fighter turned around and left. Yan Yongbua followed behind. He carefully savored the low and hoarse voice and the special flavor that belonged exclusively to a woman. He also pondered over whether or not there was any other meaning to her words. Several seconds later, he hung his head down and used the company's public channel to give his subordinates a reminder. The target's strength is strong. Everyone, when cooperating with the military, the first task is stability. Blackie, especially you. Don't be impatient and rush forward. First, be a good support. Blackie naively replied. I know. I'm watching. According to wartime regulations, all non-military communication channels were either blocked or monitored. They weren't allowed to speak carelessly either. Yan Yongbua's words and actions quickly drew a warning from command. But since there wasn't any sensitive information within, and it coincided with the military's position on Quantum Corporation, the criticism was just routine business. Only Yan Yongbua and Blackie, the two people involved, understood the true meaning within. Delay the operation for now. Observe and wait for changes. Yan Yongbua hung his head down. His mind spun. Today was truly a lucky day. I actually got the chance to get to know and interact with Captain He. Compared to this koi that could ascend the Dragon's Gate at any moment, the malnourished little cub of the Luo family could be put aside for now. There were many ways to probe a child's background. But today's good opportunity wouldn't come again if it was lost. No matter what, he had to leave a good impression in the eyes of Captain He. Yep, putting in a bit more effort wasn't a big deal. It hadn't been long since the spirit and flesh had become one, but the burning wraith had sunk into a land of death. The continuous attacks had already far surpassed the limits of what it could bear. Moreover, it had also encountered the slayer it feared the most. The format of fire and the tyrannical will had fused together, causing fatal damage to it. Losing the burning wraith was of course a pity, but compared to his own life, what was the big deal? Luonan took a deep breath. Though his soul had already returned to his body, there was still a test before him. At a level that ordinary people couldn't see, the heavily chained crow was gradually retracting, like a snake that had retreated into a deep hole to hibernate. So far, he hadn't attracted anyone's attention. But Luonan couldn't afford to be careless in the slightest before he could completely retrieve it. Retrieving the heavily chained crow took a total of around 10 seconds. But from Luonan's perspective, it felt like 10 years had passed. Luonan faintly felt that there were some subtle changes on top of the heavily chained crow, but he didn't have the mood to think too much about it. He maintained his drawing posture all the way until the chains were completely retracted, returning to nirvana along with the visualization diagram. Occasionally, he would draw a few lines that even he himself couldn't make heads or tails of. He silently waited. He really didn't know whether or not the deep blue walker would break through the door in the next second and press the muzzle of a gun against his head. Nothing happened 5 minutes later. Luonan was finally able to let out a long sigh of relief. He looked at the notebook once more. The perfectly fine sketch of the prison building had already been destroyed by his subconscious scribbling. This was fine as well. Luonan closed the notebook, raised his head, and closed his eyes. He leaned against the back of the chair, wanting to empty his mind and truly relax for a moment. But who knew that a prompt would ring out in the next second? The metal door slid open amidst the crackling sound of electricity. Luonan suddenly opened his eyes. His body nearly sprung up, but in the end, he still slowly relaxed after a moment of stiffness. He sat up, pretending to be at a loss as he looked toward the door. As for whether or not he was pretending, only the heavens knew. Luonan let out a breath of relief when he saw the person at the door. It wasn't a deep blue walker. It wasn't any fully armed combat personnel either. It was the captain who had brought him here before. You, come with me. The captain's tone was quite calm as he indicated for Luonan to follow him. Luonan didn't think too much about it. He got up and followed. He boarded the transport device with the captain and entered the internal communications line. Luonan maintained his silence within the completely sealed transport device. He had always had an introverted temperament of few words. It was fine for him to sit like this for an entire day if others didn't take the initiative to talk. In the end, the captain had to give some instructions. The police have already boarded the ship.
The investigation will begin immediately. You're a minor. There are many rules. Go see a lawyer right now and make some preparations. Lawyer?
Luo Nan was a bit baffled.
You guys hired him?
It has nothing to do with our military.
The captain gave a simple response.
The transport device arrived at another area of the warship at this time. Some arrangements had already been made here. Luo Nan took a cursory glance and saw that there was an interrogation room, a waiting room, an analysis room, and so on. There were also all sorts of sampling and analysis equipment. There were so many of them that they appeared to be quite well organized. Most of the people operating in this area didn't wear the most common gray military uniform of the Air Force. Instead, they wore the black uniforms of the Xia City Police.
The captain didn't stop.
He led Luo Nan to a room in the corner of the area. He knocked on the door and pushed it open, indicating for Luo Nan to enter.
The room was a bit noisy.
A woman wearing a business suit leaned against the edge of the table. Her head was lowered as she fiddled with the flexible screen in her hands. The AR effects of the flexible screen were clearly turned on to the max. The silhouette of a beast floated onto the screen, leaping and running. The light and shadow effects were quite gorgeous. The sound effects were quite astonishing as well. At least the howl of the beast sounded quite horrifying.
Luo Nan actually recognized it.
This was the worldwide popular 10 Days in the Wilderness. It was a phenomenal mobile game.
Hold on. This level is quite difficult.
The professional woman didn't even raise her head. She casually greeted him and used her finger to poke on the flexible screen. This absurd scene made the eyes of the captain who brought Luo Nan in twitch. Luo Nan didn't care. He nodded to the captain and went straight inside. The difficulty of 10 Days in the Wilderness was extremely high. It only took a few steps for the game character to be buried within the enormous maw of the mutant. The professional woman sighed and raised her head. A smile blossomed on her delicate and beautiful face.
Hello. Luo Nan, right?
I'm the lawyer entrusted by young Master Xia, Zhang Yingying.
Oh, Xie Junping.
Luo Nan wasn't the least bit shocked by this answer. Or perhaps it could be said that he had been waiting for this result all this time. Right now it looked like that good-for-nothing fellow hadn't disappointed him in the end.
Chapter 24. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go?
Sure, Net provides you with wonderful novels to read.
Zhang Yingying snapped her fingers. It's good that you understand.
Love, Gobe Small, say, Netku. Such a frivolous and casual attitude was far from Luo Nan's impression of a lawyer. Luo Nan felt that compared to Xie Junping sending a lawyer to help, Xie Junping sending a lawyer over was truly shocking. Next, Zhang Yingying's explanation of this matter allowed Luo Nan to confirm this point. You were there when the accident happened in the R&D district. You should know that the military and the police are taking this very seriously. Due to the chaos over there, I don't have the energy to deal with small fries like you, and I can't do any screening either, so I can only temporarily escort you to the transport ship.
Well, it can be considered a blessing in disguise.
Luo Nan was dumbfounded as he looked at her. Where is the fortune?
Zhang Yingying blinked.
It's a blessing not to rely on either side.
You're still underage, right?
Thank goodness we intervened in time on the transport ship. Otherwise, if we went to the police station and followed the strict procedures, there's no way we could hide it from our family, hee. Luo Nan was left speechless. He had to admit that this young lawyer's words had hit the nail on the head. If his aunt were to find out about this matter, the scene would be truly unimaginable. Zhang Yingying was finally satisfied when she saw Luo Nan's expression change. She said, "It's not just this. Did you know about the chaos on the warship just now?"
"I feel it."
Luo Nan answered very straightforwardly. The shadow mist still pervaded the confinement room. Even a fool would know that there was a problem.
You've got guts. I've seen the surveillance footage they sent.
There's smoke everywhere, and you're alone. Yet, you're still so calm. You're still writing and drawing. It's rare, young man. I like young people like you the most. Zhang Yingying reached out her hand and smacked Luo Nan's shoulder with force, causing his somewhat stiff muscles to scatter. Zhang Yingying ignored Luo Nan's subtle emotions and continued to speak. I arrived on the ship 2 hours ago. I wasn't able to meet with you for a while because the government and the military are nervous. They're afraid that there's a problematic person hidden among you. They don't allow the outside world to come into contact with you. But as soon as this mess broke out, they knew that it was stupid to isolate the inside from the outside, so they began to change their strategy. It was indeed rather difficult to seal the Darksider life form. Luo Nan's thoughts flowed. He was a bit absent-minded. Zhang Yingying put on an act and coughed. So you need to pay attention. Isolating the inside from the outside. You look like you're being heavily guarded, but in reality, you're just trying to be lazy. In essence, you don't care about small fish and shrimps like you. Now that you're letting go, it doesn't mean that you're giving up. Instead, it means that you have the mentality of sifting through the ranks. They're going to be much more serious than they were in the beginning. Luo Nan nodded silently. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. The captain from before had returned. Lawyer Zhang, please get ready. It's finally my turn. Zhang Yingying stood up straight. She wore high heels. She was half a head taller than Luo Nan, who had yet to finish puberty. She had a threatening aura at first glance. It was a pity that her immature cheeks and energetic smile were incompatible with her serious professional attire. She looked at Luo Nan's taut face and blinked. Are you nervous? Do you usually watch movies? Luo Nan almost couldn't keep up with her train of thought. He only answered a second later. Occasionally. In the movies, what do the villains say when they face the police? Please talk to my lawyer? Bingo! Zhang Yingying slapped Luo Nan's shoulder with force once more. She took the lead and walked out. Luo Nan stared at the slender figure of the female lawyer. One conclusion was already clear. No matter what her true goal was, this lawyer Zhang was not someone that Xie Junping could control. What are you standing there for? Let's go. Let's get this over with. Zhang Yingying urged Luo Nan from the front. Luo Nan laughed and followed her out. The stream of people in the temporarily opened interrogation area seemed to have increased a bit during the time they were talking. Xie Junping had hired a lawyer for Luo Nan. Naturally, the rich kids, as well as the other prisoners, wouldn't fight alone. According to Zhang Yingying, the private lawyers of the rich kids had already consciously formed a temporary team to negotiate with the police. Strictly speaking, Zhang Yingying was also a member of this temporary team. It was just that she had never taken it seriously before. The military personnel automatically withdrew upon entering the interrogation area. The police took over and conducted all sorts of sample tests. Luo Nan didn't say a word from beginning to end. He did whatever he was told to do. He was extremely cooperative. The calculations of the government and the military were roughly the same as Zhang Yingying's judgment. Therefore, the police's attitude was extremely serious as the executors. Therefore, Zhang Yingying's grand words of, getting this over with, were just words. All sorts of inspections, all sorts of interrogations, all sorts of procedures had to be completed. This even included dealing with the firepower of the other lawyers. Li Xueqing was still lying in the medical department of the warship, undergoing treatment. His family certainly wouldn't let this matter rest. Of course, they couldn't eliminate the possibility of using this to divert attention. This wasn't Luo Nan's area of expertise. Fortunately, he had Zhang Yingying by his side. Though the bold words of a quick and decisive battle were ruined, the young female lawyer displayed a powerful strength that was able to discern man's talent without any hindrances. Of course, Luo Nan didn't understand the negotiations behind the scenes, causing all the firepower to be like thunder but little raindrops. They were silently annihilated. From Luo Nan's perspective, the entire interrogation process was nothing more than repeating the events from when he left his home in the morning to when he was arrested 7 or 8 times. Then, he cleared the stage. Oh my, what a waste of time. Zhang Yingying walked out of the interrogation room with large strides. She ignored the expressions of the surrounding police officers and let out a long sigh. She casually lifted the sapphire blue scarf around her neck a bit, revealing half of her snow-white chest. Right now, a full 10 hours had passed since their entrance. The marathon schedule really was exhausting. Fortunately, Luo Nan had ordered 2 large nutritious meals in between to replenish his energy. He could be considered to have made it through the most difficult period. Zhang Yingying clapped her hands. Okay, the matter has been resolved perfectly. The police will only leave behind a file for future inquiries. The main focus is still on the matter with the R&D district. As for the so-called personal injury here, relax. There won't be any repercussions. The world of the rich. Luo Nan was like a normal nationalistic youth. He snorted coldly in his heart. Then I can leave now? Not yet. It's impossible for a warship to land for you alone. A landing craft also costs money. So you still need to wait for those people to finish their interrogation before you can leave. It seems like Yeah, you're the first. So you still have to wait. Luo Nan sighed soundlessly. At this time, his heart inexplicably sensed something. He turned his head and saw a transport vehicle dragging a few disassembled exoskeleton armors pass by not too far away. A swift and fierce man with a dark complexion and a buzz cut was on top of the vehicle. His gaze fell upon Luo Nan's face. He didn't conceal his coldness at all. It was the same even when Luo Nan met his gaze.
Chapter 25. A genius in 1 second remembers love? Speak, net. Providing you with wonderful novels to read. Weirdo.
Luo Nan moved his gaze away and swept over the exoskeleton armor on the vehicle. There were no obvious markings, but the special blue paint already made clear the answer. Deep blue walkers. Moreover, they were the non-military kind. 90% of the world's deep blue walkers were in the military. This was without a doubt. But as the developer of the Deep Blue platform, Quantum Corporation possessed a few of these so-called experimental models. This was a matter of course. It was just that Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue walkers were not allowed to be equipped with weapons of mass destruction. They had fewer modules, and their physiques appeared quite skinny. They were also equipped with a few auxiliary equipment, such as flow deflector fins. These small details could be hidden from others, but they could not be hidden from Luo Nan. He was even able to find the one that he had once crossed paths among these exoskeleton armors that looked completely identical. The second from the left was the field controller. He was the first to engage in combat with the burning wraith, and he played an extremely crucial role in the final encirclement. Luo Nan's eyes slightly narrowed. The system layout and parameters of the Deep Blue walkers were undoubtedly highly classified. Only bits and pieces could be pieced together from many channels. Perhaps not many people had seen the Deep Blue walkers in their current state. They had just been unloaded. They had yet to be boxed up. Luo Nan clutched his own notebook. He wanted to immediately pick up a pen and completely draw down all the details of this piece of equipment. But at this time, the swift and fierce dark-faced man on the vehicle cast an even colder gaze over. Then he performed an operation. An invisible membrane flipped over from the vehicle, covering and sealing all of the armor. Luo Nan was a bit startled. Then he shrugged his shoulders. Are the people of Quantum Corporation all this petty? He seems to be from Quantum Corporation. You're familiar with him? Zhang Yingying suddenly asked. Luo Nan answered honestly. I don't know him. Then what are you staring blankly for? Let's go. Zhang Yingying urged him from the side, pulling him back to the previous room. She let out a long sigh after entering the room. She turned around and leaned against the edge of the office desk. She stretched her waist. Dealing with those bureaucrats and litigators is really annoying. Luo Nan was speechless towards this female litigator. What was more, he stood in the room, not knowing what to do. Zhang Yingying giggled and pointed at him. You did well just now, so I'll give you a gift. Look, this is the cabin. Don't be dissatisfied. The entire starship has only temporarily lifted the restriction on external communication in this area. Otherwise, how can we play the game? Luo Nan subconsciously glanced at his wristband. Sure enough, the communication and network functions were unblocked. What's with these dozens of missed calls? Flipping through it roughly, he found that most of them were from his cousin, Mo Ya. Starting from the morning, there were 25 of them in total. Then, from 7 p.m. onwards, my aunt also had 3 records. It was already 10 p.m. Luo Nan just felt his scalp go numb. He was unable to think of anything else. He hurriedly made a call back. Naturally, he was looking for his usual accomplice, Miss Mo Ya. Sister? Nan. Mo Ya's voice was filled with uncertainty. Sister, what's the matter? What's the matter? What have you been doing all day? He didn't pick up my calls, I couldn't find him at school, and I couldn't find him at home.
I was ready to call the police. Did you know that? Moya's high-pitched rock and roll voice was like a sandstorm, covering the sky and the sun. It was also like the explosion of a nuclear bomb, burning with rage. Why didn't you go to class? Why didn't he take the club exam? You tricked me yesterday, didn't you? Luonan, you've grown up. You're just outside by yourself, and you're already having fun? Luonan was instantly showered with a torrent of abuse. The intense penetrative sound broke through the sound reception effect of his wristband and reverberated throughout the entire room. Zhang Yingying whistled and looked up at the ceiling with an innocent expression of, I don't know anything. Luonan didn't care about the awkwardness. He walked away a bit and reported the current situation to his cousin. Today's matter, as long as the burning wraith and the other elements were excluded, it was completely his bad luck. There was nothing to hide. After Moya vented her accumulated uneasiness and anger, she was still able to listen to his explanation. However, she didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy for Luonan's misfortune. Sticking together with that trash Xie Junping serves you right for being unlucky. If you don't learn your lesson, you'll suffer in the future. The Mystic Arts Research Society is more or less like this. It's fine if you can't go. Huh. Luonan suddenly came to a realization. He had undoubtedly missed the Mystic Arts Research Society's entrance interview today. But how did his cousin know? Looking at the caller ID, Moya was quite restrained in the morning. She only called 2 times, but starting from 4:30 in the afternoon when the club activities began, she called once every 10 minutes on average. Clearly, she only reacted after knowing that he missed the exam. Moya clenched her teeth and sneered, I know you're stupid. You thought of an acquaintance over there, so you asked them for help. The problem right now is that you directly missed the exam and stood them up. You're stepping on my face and rubbing it on the ground. Also, you didn't pick up my mother's phone call. It was me who risked my life to say that you needed to do an experiment for the club exam. You better make up this lie for me. Otherwise you're dead. No one can save you from the heavens or the earth. Luonan's heart warmed. He knew that his sister had certainly done quite a bit of work in private. Directly missing the exam this time would indeed make things very awkward. He blurted out, Then I'll treat you to a meal tomorrow as an apology. Moya sneered, You don't have to treat me. But let me tell you something. Stay away from that circle. That group of bastards have a lifetime of squandering wealth as a foundation. But you don't have anything. I don't want to use the family property I'll inherit in the future to help an idiot like you. The final conversation between the sister and brother had nothing to do with familial love, but Luonan had long since become accustomed to his cousin's way of speaking. He didn't mind it. He also learned that Moya was guarding his apartment in Blue Bay Community right now. Naturally, he thanked her profusely. Moya completely disdained this. She said in a loud voice, I'm going to the show. Then she hung up the phone. Moya had formed a band with other people since her university days. She already had a bit of fame in the Xia City area and was currently on the rise. She was busiest every night, but today she was guarding the apartment for Luonan's sake, waiting for news. There was no need to say how much face she had given up. But Luonan couldn't help but grimace when he thought of the task his cousin had arranged for him. He pondered for a moment, but he still plucked up the courage to give his aunt a call. He didn't dare to mention today's matter. He just used Moya's lie to fabricate a reason that the interview needed to test his experimental abilities. As for the exam results, he could only say vaguely that the results would come out tomorrow. He had to deal with it first. It wasn't good for him to turn on a video call. He couldn't tell if his aunt believed him or not from the phone. He just felt that his aunt was quite easy to talk to tonight. She even let him rest early. He had inexplicably passed the test. Perhaps his aunt felt that there was some misunderstanding because he was hesitating about the exam results? That would be for the best. Chapter 26. Genius 1 second. Remember love go divided by small? Talk. Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. In any case, this phone call wasn't much different from a harsh entrance exam. Luonan let out a breath of relief after hanging up. He relaxed all of a sudden. Love, go, small, talk. Netko. He turned his head to look at Zhang Yingying and unexpectedly discovered that she was flipping through the notebook he had casually placed on his seat. The page she flipped to was the distorted sketch of the prison building.
Though it had already been destroyed by Luo Nan's unconscious messy lines, Zhang Yingying still looked at it extremely seriously. She even used her hand to trace the direction of the lines. Luo Nan frowned and coughed. Zhang Yingying raised her head. She wasn't embarrassed at all. Instead, she asked him with interest, "This is a fantasy diagram, right? Why did you draw it? Was it because you felt something while sitting in the confinement room? What does the distorted layout represent? And what do those tools of violence symbolize? The outer lines are also very interesting." Luo Nan originally wanted to refuse to answer, but when he saw Zhang Yingying's expression, he suddenly thought of the subtle attitude she had displayed from time to time ever since they met. A sensitive chord suddenly plucked at his heart. Luo Nan looked at Zhang Yingying once more with a completely different gaze. He swept his gaze up and down with a few more probing thoughts. "Hey, is this hard to say? I just felt that I should draw it this way. The feeling came, so I just drew it this way." Luo Nan was simply spouting nonsense, but Zhang Yingying was actually very satisfied with this sort of answer. "Feeling it. This is very good." Luo Nan grew more and more curious towards Zhang Yingying, but he didn't want his notebook to remain in her hands for too long. He reached out and took it back, minding his own business as he sat back in his seat. It looked like he didn't want to talk much, but Luo Nan was actually pondering over how to further prove his own judgment. And at this time, he heard Zhang Yingying call out, "Hey, want to play around?" Luo Nan raised his head and saw Zhang Yingying raise her flexible screen to indicate to him, 10 days of combat is the essence. It's much more enjoyable than playing solo." Luo Nan wasn't in the mood to play, so he casually declined. But Zhang Yingying was especially insistent. Right now she was just a lively and playful young girl. Her mental age seemed to be even younger than Luo Nan's. Come on, it's killing time. Looking at the police's progress, it might not be over in another 7 to 8 hours. We'll be lucky if we can go home at 5 in the morning. At that time, just send me directly to school. Don't worry, I won't throw you off the warship. The question now is, are we going to play? Zhang Yingying had an impatient appearance. Right now, it had begun to leave the mobile game domain and was released on various immersive game platforms. When he was still living at his aunt's house, he had been dragged by his siblings to play against each other. He possessed basic common sense. He only thought about it for a moment before choosing a classic hero that was relatively easy to pick up. The Earth Army's ace in firepower, Haya. The data showed that this robust officer, active in the late 80s, was a walking arsenal with the support of the military's Fiery Eye platform. Though his movement speed was slow, his violent and accurate firepower was enough to eliminate the majority of enemies from a distance of 500 meters. After the character selection was complete, the game automatically configured the battlefield. But when Zhang Yingying saw the character selection, she immediately shouted, "What's the meaning of this? Are you looking down on me?" Ha! It's fine if you don't choose Deep Blue. Fantasy, Mutant, which one is bad? Are you trying to deal with me by choosing a newbie character? There were over 100 characters to choose from in 10 days in the wilderness. They could be divided into 4 categories: the Standby class, Deep Blue class, Fantasy class, and Mutant class. The Standby class referenced military exoskeleton weapons platforms and famous battle heroes. The Deep Blue class referenced Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue platforms modifications. The Mutant class chose the most typical mutant species found in the wilderness. The Fantasy class was a fantasy weapon with a bold and unconstrained style. Though the game company did a great job of balancing things out, since they were referencing reality, they had to take care of reality. Out of the 4 categories, the Standby class characters were undoubtedly the weaker ones. They completely relied on their character's charm and the newbie characteristics of being easy to pick up. In online cooperative mode, the popularity of the Standby class uncles was quite decent. But in PvP mode, unless it was a newbie delivering food and an expert oppressing a chicken, generally speaking, no one would choose this category. Luo Nan shot a glance at Zhang Yingying. The corner of his mouth twitched when faced with her incomparably indignant attitude. "You're not choosing Deep Blue?" After a strange silence, Zhang Yingying clasped her hands together. She exaggeratedly elongated her voice and her eyes twinkled like stars. "Huh? You don't like the Deep Blue platform either. I hate the color blue the most. I get dizzy looking at it too much." Luo Nan shot a final glance at the female lawyer's sapphire blue scarf and lowered his head speechlessly. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.